We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AV Rant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H., and this week I am here with...
Hi, this is Joe K.
Hey, so we have a first-time guest co-host for this podcast. If you are a regular listener of DJ's Brightside Home Theater podcast, you might have heard Joe's voice a time or two already, but we're obviously going to introduce Joe to our AV Rant audience. Now, before we dig into the introduction, I'm going to go ahead and get all of our, who we are and thanking our listeners of the week out of the way right away, so that's done at the top of the show, makes it nice and easy. So Joe's just going to hang out for a second while I go through all that to let everyone know, in case this is your first time joining us, this is AV Rant. This is your home theater and AV questions answered. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is email them to us, and our email address is question@avrant.com. You can, of course, come to our website, which is, surprise, surprise, avrant.com, where you can see the show notes, and we have links to a Flickr album. If we're showing images throughout the show, you can see them there. Or you can see it in video form over on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/AVRant. We're also on some social medias, facebook.com/AVRantPodcast, and then you can contact us individually. Tom, who is away this week, obviously, is the normal host of this podcast. He can be reached directly, tom@avrant.com, via email. I'm rob@avrant.com. We have another person who often pinch hits for us, who is lee@avrant.com, and that's where all of your complaints really should go. He's our customer service representative. And then I'm over on Twitter as @FirstReflect, and I can be reached there. And so let's introduce Joe a little bit. Joe, you're on Twitter as well. Where can people reach you if they want to?
Yeah, @Joe Klusnick, if you're looking for me there. I'm not there that often, but yeah.
Who is these days? Honestly, who is? But yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun today. Joe, why don't you tell us very quickly just a little bit about yourself, your bona fides. If you want to come to YouTube and see this, he's sitting in his home theater right now, so we know that much. We know this is a genuine home theater fan, although you're not getting a very large, gigantic view of everything that's going on. But you can see some theater seats and some surround back speakers behind his head, so we know Tom would have a nit to pick with you. No, I'm just joking about that. But Joe, why don't you introduce yourself to the AV Rant audience a little bit?
Yeah, so long-time home theater enthusiast. I have been in and around the industry for many, many years. Cut my teeth on car audio, have worked in the retail, the custom integration, the home theater design side of things. Written for a couple of different magazines as well as some websites. So yeah, done a lot of it. Been a CEDIA certified designer for 15 so years now. But yeah, a little bit of everything in the home theater industry.
That is amazing. I mean, here's a man who has the credentials. I don't have any credentials, so I take it as a point of pride that a person like Joe, you've been a fairly long time listener of AV Rant, if I'm correct.
Many, many years. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I mean, I think it's, I take it as a point of pride that a gentleman such as yourself found us, listened to us, didn't leave immediately, so we couldn't have been too terrible as far as that goes. And, our audience isn't gigantic, but I know we have engineers who listen to us, people with PhDs who listen to us, people who have CEDIA certification like yourself who still listen to us year after year. So very happy to have you here.
It's kind of like watching TV when there's only 3 channels. If I want to talk home theater, I've got to go to people talking about home theater.
What a dagger through the heart. We're only there because there's so little selection. Oh no.
I kid.
I know. I get that. So we'll be talking to Joe quite a bit. I've got questions myself that I wanted to ask from the installation, CEDIA certification, professional installation side of things. And so this week's episode, the format that you might be used to from AV Rant, it's not going to be miles away, but I'm going to do a little bit of editorializing, a little bit of mixing things up slightly, because I want to make sure we have some time for me to just chat with Joe. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. We will reserve reserve most of that for towards the end of the podcast there. But I wanted to dive right in and thank our listeners of the week before we go any further into things. Listeners of the week are people who support this podcast in some way. One of those is financially, and one way to support us financially is directly through PayPal with a PayPal donation. You can come to our website, avrant.com. On the desktop version, over on the right-hand side, there's an image of a cup of coffee, and the text says, support AV Rant. You click on that, and it takes you to PayPal, where you can make a one-time donation or a recurring donation if you would like to. So Kevin did that. Normally, I'm not privy to who recently gave us a PayPal donation, but Tom texted me while he's away on his family vacation. He's like, hey, Kevin sent us a PayPal donation. So I know that much. So thank you very much, Kevin, for that financial support. And the other way you can support us financially is through Patreon. We're at patreon.com/AVRantPodcast, where you can sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. The minimum is $1 per month, and we're super happy if you decide to donate that amount or any amount above that. So we have 138 patrons over there. It ticked down by one because I think somebody's credit card number expired. We're into a new month with this episode, and that always seems to happen. But big thank you to everybody who supports this podcast financially. And then we just got a bunch of notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going in one way or another, whether the usual hosts are here, whatever events are going on in the world. We've missed an episode or two throughout the past year or two, but we've had a pretty good streak going here. So want to give our thanks to Gurinder, who said he enjoyed how happy I sounded when I got to say, now go out and listen to something again. I haven't been able to say that for a number of years, a self-imposed rule, but regardless, he is correct. I was very happy about that. And Gurinder was also hoping that he and I, Gurinder and I, might be able to meet up in person. He's going to be visiting some family in the Vancouver area coming up in July. So that'd be a nice meet and greet if we're able to make all that happen with our schedules. He also says happy travels to Tom and his family. Also got notes of gratitude from Jay, Kris, Julian, who had a bit of an update. He said he had to admit he agrees with Tom that there will always be a part of his mind that simply wants KEF R series meta speakers in every position of his office converted into a one-man theater. But not only that, if he had his druthers, then he'd go for a Marantz AV10 and a Amp 10 combo, $14,000 combo for those separates. Go for a 9.2. Heck, why not 9.4.6 configuration? And, throw up even more speakers than that. The center height, the voice of God speaker, in case he wants to try out Oro 3D in all its glory. But cooler heads are prevailing on his side, and realistic budgets more than that. So he's going to get the KEF R3 Meta bookshelf speakers that we talked about. He's going to experiment with the included port plugs, just as I suggested that he try out. And he'll move his LS50 speakers to surround duty. Those are some overkill for surrounds, but they'll be very, very nice. And he'll go with 4 of the Q series Atmos modules for his heights. And he plans to report back when all of that is set up. So thank you for the update, Julian. Also got notes of gratitude from Jack, Shawn, Toke, who said he has started going back through our old episodes and is enjoying finding lots of great info. You can find our whole back catalog on our website, avrant.com. And one last note of gratitude that came in this week from Rohan. So thank you all so much for the notes of encouragement. They're definitely appreciated. And before we go on into the news, I want to talk to Joe a little bit more about some of the anecdotes. He and I chatted briefly yesterday before we're doing this, mainly just to make sure Skype was working, because that is not a guarantee. But a little bit more background, perhaps on your more recent background as far as what's taking place with the builder that you're working with currently and things that are going on with your current home theater installations.
Yeah, so as Rob mentioned, I do work for a company that does build a number of different. We're a home builder, we're an HVAC company, we're also build assisted living and multifamily. And some of the assisted living projects, I think you guys mentioned a system I had done and shared with you guys previously on a room that we had built. It was very interesting for me coming from, I've always been in marketing, but on the home theater side and going into a builder and seeing what they were doing prior to getting there. And what I thought a home theater should be and what it should include. They were far from that. So I said, hey, how can I help out? And I kind of got drafted into that being part of my current job also. So I'm back in that home theater side of things, but building it more for commercial applications, but using consumer level gear for the smaller sizes.
Right. Yeah. And we know from the pictures that you kindly sent in and looked fantastic in our opinion, we know that you managed to keep the budgets under control. These were assisted living buildings that you were putting these in. They didn't have the world's largest budget to install a theater, even though they needed a space that could seat many people, more than you would often find just in a regular house, regular residential house. So I was a bit interested, like your background before that, if you were doing much more expensive type of installations and sort of the adjustment that you had to go through to go from one to the other.
Yeah, so I mean, I got into home theater for myself, going back years and years, big time into car audio, going through high school and college. Actually ended up working in that industry in a couple of different ways. On the retail and installation side, was big in the sound quality IASCA car audio competition back in the 90s. Worked for a manufacturer for a number of years on the marketing side, as well as technical services for them. Soundstream Technologies, which if you were into car audio in the 90s, you knew the brand. They also did manufacturing amplifiers, multi-room, distributed audio, D-to-A converters, things like that. So they were an early CEDIA member. Worked for a company later on that owned and operated a low voltage integration company for home builders. So residential new construction and doing everything from distributed audio, central vacuums, alarms, structured wiring, and home theater. And that's where I got my initial CEDIA certification and had an opportunity to attend a lot of the trade shows and events, did all of the product management, built a number of theaters, both for upper end systems, showrooms, displays for both home builders as well as our own company. We were, big JBL dealer at the time. We carried the JBL synthesis line as well as their entry level product. We were a Sonance dealer, Yamaha. So really got to get very familiar. And that was kind of during the transition from, all the analog connections to HDMI, early days of that. So that was very interesting to see. Got to try out lots of projectors, screens, all kinds of different gear, and got to work with guys doing acoustic treatments, and attended a lot of, like I said, the classes and seminars by some of the really founding guys in the industry. So that was a great background. Was also doing my own home theaters at the time. So in the last my wife and I have owned 4 homes, and all of them have had some level of home theater in them. Nice. They keep getting bigger and bigger as we go. But yeah, so built a lot for myself. But yeah, really enjoy as much involvement as I can with the industry and the products.
Fantastic. Just before we get into sort of the normal segments that we have on this podcast a little bit more, I'm really curious about that CEDIA certification process that you went through. That is not something I have gone through, and just I know that I don't know exactly. You can tell me and inform our listeners who aren't as familiar with it as well, like when you were first initially getting into CEDIA, getting that certification, and then what happens with keeping that up. Is it like a regular annual check-in type of thing, or what is the whole process there with CEDIA?
Yeah, so the CEDIA Expo, as you know, is a trade show that moves around. It's usually in September. I'm going to be going again this year to Denver, San Diego, Texas, Indianapolis, where they're based out of, and they kind of shuffle it around. The trade show, walking the floor, seeing the exhibitors is one part of it, but the education is also a really big part of it. So going and being able to take classes from the guys who write the books on this stuff, acoustical engineers and the guys who are really high-end home theater designers, the names that you would recognize or see in magazines that have built high-dollar systems. So yeah, back in early 2000s, went down to San Diego, sat in classes with Anthony Grimani and Rich Green and Russ Hershelman, I think, was teaching back then, Dennis Erskine, and these guys were, gracious enough to share their time and sit in rooms with us for hours on end, kind of walking through, what is it to build a home theater? What are the design challenges that you're going to run into? And it's everything from the room structure, the electrical, the HVAC, the audio video equipment, the seating, the acoustic treatments, the noise reduction, so many different elements of it that they walked you through, and also talking about some of the financial aspects of it. If you've got this much of a budget, how are you going to apply those different elements to it? Talking about different interconnects. What are you going to use to go from this piece of gear to that piece of gear? What size wires do you need to run? How big? How many? What's your current draw? How many dB? What SPL level you're trying to reach? So it's a lot of the stuff you talk about every episode in the show, but it was just very distilled down. Right. So we did kind of a 2-day course on that, and you really needed to have a strong background in this
Right.
stuff before you got to this level.
Yeah,
right?
there's
So
no way in 2 days you could go from
you're not
I
jumping
truly
in.
don't know anything and have
Yeah.
that fully. You'd have to come in with a pretty decent amount of knowledge, and this is more like refining. I would say if
Right.
it's only
And-
going to be 2 days there.
And it was, I mean, it went all the way back to my car audio experience.
Mhm.
It went to my time at the university that, everything from, I studied physics, mechanical engineering, chemistry, perceptual psychology was a big part of it. So, I mean, all of those things kind of helped to build a foundation that then as I played with this stuff and got into it and hooked things up and burnt things up and broke things and figured out how to make it work and not work, all of that. And then, the experience of working in construction and being on a job site and knowing the difference between a load bearing wall or, what's a rafter, what's a joist, all these different kind of things that help to, you never know what questions they're going to put, right? There's hundreds of questions that they can choose from. I think there's, only 100 of them that they'll ask in a given test session, but you answer, multiple choice questions and see what kind of score you get. Certification's usually good for a couple of years,
Okay.
2-3 years, something like that. If you get another certification during that amount of time, it can be extended. But yeah, you go back and retake it, and every time you take it, it's a different class and it's a different test because so much changes so quickly in
It
this
does.
industry, right?
Yep.
What they were asking 10 years ago is way different than what they're
Right.
asking today. So, yeah.
And I mean, maybe just one more question on that topic for someone who's hearing that and thinking, you know what, I'm interested in getting into that. What advice do you have for someone who might be thinking that way?
So, I mean, CEDIA is a fantastic organization. Get in contact with them. You can become an individual member. You can become a company member. They have a podcast. You can listen to that. They share a lot of great information on that one. CE Pro, which is somewhat related publication, also has a different podcast you can listen to, talk about a lot of the same stuff. They have local events, regional events that you can go for, one day and see exhibitors and manufacturers putting out displays, or go to the big show, go to the CEDIA show, CEDIA Expo coming up September 7th through 9th in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
I'll
And I
be
mean,
there.
I guess we buried the lead there a little bit on this. We got to do the pop quiz. What does CEDIA stand for?
Consumer Electronics Designers Installers Association, right? So it's kind of the industry body that all the professionals that are in home theater kind of are associated with, and you can cedia.org online and check them out there too.
That's right. That's always the fun one because you hear people like saying the name and saying the trade show, and then a lot of people don't know what it stands for. You know what though? I thought the I stood for integration. So did they change that or?
And I'm remembering probably back a ways, so yeah, they may have updated that, and I don't know.
Or I was remembering the old one, and who knows? I don't think it's actually vitally important. If you say CEDIA, you'll sound A-okay.
Exactly.
All right. Well, why don't you and I have a little bit of fun with one of the regular segments that we usually start off with and just talk a little bit about what we watched this past week. I'm going to let you give your voice a little bit of a rest and just talk about what I watched real quickly. First up, I managed to binge the entire, it was listed as season 1, but now it's just listed as a limited series because there never was a season 2, and the way the story was told didn't require a season 2, which was the show Devs, which was an FX show. I managed to see that on Disney Plus here. I think it would be on Hulu in the States, being from the FX channel. But this is the same creator as the fellow who wrote and directed Ex Machina.
Okay.
And so this was like a 8 episode limited series with a bit of the same sort of feel to it, right? The sort of very deliberately paced, somewhat slow paced, almost a little bit quiet, get you to lean in, bit of creepiness to it. So he was keeping that same sort of milieu.
Mr. Robot or Humans kind of a feel to it?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't exactly say Mr. Robot, although a little bit of that feel to it. But yeah, if you've seen Ex Machina, then I think that you get the sort of tone they were going for. So the one thing I wanted to really praise in this show was excellent use of the score. The score is a mix of like some contemporary jazz, some very like strange vocalizations that were done for effect, and they did a lot of synchronizing the images to the score that was going along to punctuate the images they're going on screen, sometimes flashing very quickly as he went by, particularly at the beginning of each episode. And I thought they did a really, really good job of integrating and synchronizing this unique sounding score to all the images that were going on. As far as what is the whole show overall about, it's this somewhat mysterious tech company that's into quantum computing, and there's a young woman who's working at the company whose boyfriend goes missing, and she's basically trying to track down exactly what happened to him, and there's like a cover story that's going on there, and that's sort of the baseline mystery. But the criticism I have of this show is that it's not quite baby's first intro to quantum and like many worlds theory and things like that, but it's I would say the uneducated stoners I read the first sentence of Wikipedia on each of these topics take, because this tries to be somewhat heady, and like the characters are like having their minds blown by what they're seeing, but it's not very deep at all. And I don't know if that was down to how it was originally conceived and written, or if that was the studio coming in and saying, we can't have anything deeper than the most cursory example of what quantum computing might be and what many worlds theory might be and what predictive algorithms are and any of this type of stuff. That they're just like, just say the words and that'll sound smart enough. And that's about where this show stopped. So not terribly impressive on that front, but if you go with it more from the emotional side, then I thought it was compelling enough that I watched the entire series. I have to say, the lead in this show, who played Kyoko in Ex Machina, so although I don't think she had any lines in that movie, but it's the same actor. I don't know if this was the directing. I mean, part of it was the writing, because, hey, she had to say the words that were written for her. But the way that she delivered the lines, I was like, ugh. It didn't work very well for me. And there was one episode where her character basically wasn't in it. She just bookended the episode. The rest of it was other characters and more backstory, and I thought that was the best episode of the entire series. So I don't want to lay this on her as an actor, because there were other people on set who could have, told her to alter her performance. So I don't know exactly what went on there, but I didn't care for the main character, which is a bit problematic in a show.
This sounds like a ringing endorsement.
Right. Yes. Well, look, so I mean, the reviews online from other people who viewed it, it's pretty much love it or hate it, it seems like. And so, like I say, I liked the tone. I liked the way it was shot. I very much liked the use of the score. But yeah, I can't give a very ringing endorsement to the story, the cursory way it touched on a lot of what could have been very interesting and deep philosophical ideas, but went no further than the first sentence of it on Wikipedia. And the lead's performance I didn't care for. So the other movie that I watched this week was John Wick Chapter 4. I know people have been loving this movie. I liked the way that it ended. I don't want them to make a John Wick 5. I think you can leave it here, but hey, they're doing the same thing with Toy Story, right? Where nobody thought you needed another one, and they're going to make one anyway. So
the dollar speaks.
I guess so. I just it's just a farce now. I'm sorry. It's just Chapter 4 was just farcical for most of it. They went.
He's a superhero.
Well, I mean, he's a cartoon. Everyone is just a cartoon at this point. I'm like, really? That's what we're going to do with John Wick? Like, the thing everybody loved about the first one was, yes, of course it was heightened action. It's not truly realistic, but it had, like, enough verisimilitude that you could be like, oh, maybe someone who is super highly trained there could really be a John Wick out there. Plus, he was supposed to be the only John Wick. He's so amazingly scary and good that even amongst other professional assassins, he's the boogeyman. So it's like, okay, that's why everybody loved the first movie. Now he's just a cartoon. It was just farcical. And I mean, all the effort. I mean, the effort was there on screen. My goodness, did the stunt people and the stunt coordinators and the stunt choreographers make the effort? No, I can't chide anything about that. But it was just like, really? That's just I don't know. I can't say I really loved John Wick Chapter 4, other than just pure spectacle, which I guess is why people who loved it. So,
But there's lots of guns, lots of shooting, lots of chasing.
there sure are. It's just none of it is remotely believable as having actually happened. So I don't know. I can't say I loved it. I'm sorry. That was me. But yes, if you're fine with just the spectacle of it, then I can appreciate it from that way. What did Joe watch?
Over the weekend, got a chance to check out Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and absolutely loved it.
Now,
it was...
Wait, Into the Spider-Verse, that was the first one. So is this the first one that you watched or the sequel?
Sequel.
Okay, so that's
Beyond?
Across the Spider-Verse Part 1,
Sorry.
I think? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so very, very impressed by the movie. Liked it better than the first one. My son and I went and checked it out. We saw it at one of the Cinemark XD theaters, so really big picture, big sound. Picture quality was great. Sound quality was great. The story was really very well told. It's really does a better job of a lot of the multiverse stuff than anything I've seen prior to this. Really made each of the different universes that he traveled to artistically feel and look and sound very distinct.
Nice.
As far as the way they did the artwork for Spider-Gwen's universe as opposed to the main characters. Really very well done. As I mentioned, it is a part 1. There will be a sequel coming out, I think, next year. It does leave you on a very strong cliffhanger, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, seeing so many different Spider-Man characters, and it really did. It tied a lot of some of the live action movies had a very small little piece of it. The cartoon from the '60s, the comic books, just all of it was in there. Did a really impressive job.
Fantastic. I mean, to say that you liked it even better than the first one, that is high praise in this case, because the first of the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, everybody loved that, which is why, as far as I can tell, box office-wise, Across the Spider-Verse is doing gangbusters, so well-deserved, it sounds like. I haven't got to watch it yet. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, check it out.
Awesome. So, why don't we go on into the news? There's going to be a theme that you're going to recognize in this week's news. And I think since I've got a bunch of images that I kind of want to synchronize to what I've written up about this first item, Joe, why don't you go ahead and read out the first news story? And it's not going to be a surprise to anybody.
Okay. Apple's long-rumored mixed reality headset was officially announced at WWDC 2023, and it's called the Vision Pro. It's a $3,500 headset that Apple says will be available in early 2024. They're dubbing it a facial computer and calling the experience spatial computing. Form factor wise, it very much looks and fits like a pair of ski goggles. The entire front surface is glass that's been 3D formed and laminated to act as a lens for the many cameras and sensors on the front. There's also a curved lenticular OLED screen on the front that's used to show other people's video feed on your eyes. You can use the digital crown to dial in how much of the outside world you can see inside the headset, from full AR to full VR, with the outward-facing screen indicating to others how much you're able to see them. The main structure is aluminum, while the head strap around the back is a pleated fabric. It's modular so that the face padding and head strap can be replaced. And early hands-on reports mention how you can scan your face and ears with your iPhone, and those scans will be used to select the best available face padding for a perfect fit, and also tune the built-in directional speakers for the most precise placement of spatial audio. Digging into the slightly vague specs, the displays are using micro OLED technology, allowing for more than 4K resolution per eye over 23 million pixels total across 2 display chips, each about the size of a postage stamp. A 3-element lens system and foveated rendering keep the image sharp and text legible wherever you look. If you wear prescription glasses, you'll need to get custom Zeiss lens add-ons that magnetically snap into place. And on the video side, wide color HDR, 3D, and high frame rate are all supported. Powering everything is an Apple M2 chip alongside a new R1 chip specifically designed to handle all of the sensor data. There are no controllers, although you can pair any popular game controller. The normal way you'll interact with the new Vision OS system is with simple hand gestures, voice commands, and eye tracking. You'll also scan your own face to make a digital representation of your face when you're using FaceTime. On the inside, there are 4 IR cameras and a ring of IR LEDs for tracking your eye movements and logging you in via optic ID. On the outside, a pair of full-color stereoscopic main cameras pass through the outside world for AR and can also work as 3D camera for recording and pictures. 6 other cameras and IR LEDs do most of the tracking, while LiDAR and true depth cameras allow for accurate mapping of virtual elements onto the real-world objects. The built-in speakers on the side use audio ray tracing of your environment and spatial audio rendering to make the audio sound natural. But other people can hear those speakers playing, and we can't imagine they're able to deliver much bass, so you can always use AirPods instead. Despite the advanced technology and the high price, early hands-on reports indicate that it's still on the heavier side as far as VR headsets go, and you aren't going to forget that you're wearing the thing and looking at the world through lenses and cameras. Furthermore, while it's a completely standalone device, there's still going to be a power cord always present and connected to the left side. The included battery is external and only lasts 2 hours. You can plug it into a wall while in use for all-day power, but it's still going to feel like a semi-tethered experience. And don't expect to use it with Steam or as a gaming VR headset with your PC. This is all Apple.
Yes, indeed. So I don't know how much you were following the news as this was being announced, but what are your thoughts on this Vision Pro from Apple?
Saw it on the Today Show, and so they're big news, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
This is very much Ready Player One kind of a direction we're going.
Got a bit of a
I
look
saw some video of people able to watch huge screens floating in their living room in front of them, which looked kind of cool. I'll still take a home theater over this thing. I don't want to wear this on my face.
Okay. So, it's funny because, the rumors were all out there. I knew this thing was planned and coming. We all knew that it was going to be expensive coming from Apple. The rumors out there before the official launch were like, it was going to be about $3,000. Turns out it's even more than that. It's $3,500, not coming till the beginning of 2024. So this isn't one where they're like, hey, go buy it now. They didn't drop that kind of announcement on it. And yet, looking through everything that was happening, this is the first generation of this, right? Apple hasn't done an augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality, whatever you want to end up calling this thing. They haven't done a headset before. This is the start. And I can see why they want to start here, where this could potentially go, because eventually, we are going to get to where you put something that is probably going to be lighter and less noticeable physically on your face at some point, and the images and the experience is going to get to where it's seamless enough that at moments you kind of forget you're wearing the thing. It kind of just feels like you are looking at the real world and having augmented things overlaid on top of that real world. Like, I can see how we're going to get there, and you've got to start somewhere, and I'm kind of excited for where this might all lead.
You're going to walk around with this thing on. It weighs a ton. It lasts 2 hours at a time.
Probably not this one, but in a generation or two, right? So, I see the sort of through line similarities to when the first iPhone was announced. And that one, I think people instantly recognized, okay, we've had a sort of internet experience on our cell phones, but it hasn't been, I can literally just go to any web page, and the original iPhone just saying, you can now go to any web page with your phone, and that was like instantly recognizable, and everybody saw the potential of that and wanted it. But if we go back now to the first iPhone, that's going to be a kind of miserable experience for us, and yet it was pretty impressive for what it was immediately. Saw the potential of where it was going to go. And if they hadn't started there, right, if you literally demand perfection and affordability from generation one, well, we're never going to get there. So I'm actually, I think, more positive on this than I expected to be, and more positive on it than a lot of the early takes that I've seen on it, because I kind of like the idea that, like, okay, so $3,500, even that for generation one. How expensive is that really compared to a top-of-the-line OLED TV? right? It's not
And
that far
I could
off.
I could see applications for this for, military training, things like
Oh, of
that
course.
in a VR. It's a much more cost effective for pilots in a virtual situation. In my industry, we do a lot of virtual home tours where people want to be able to walk through a brand new house, and we can record that all in 3D stereoscopy, and it's a video game engine. I could very much appreciate the ability for a potential home buyer to walk through a property and see that house wherever they are in the world any time of day.
Yeah, so I mean, one criticism that I did hear that I definitely agree with is people are like, oh, okay, so they went the no controllers route. This is all just being done with hand gestures, voice controls, and everyone who's gotten to try it early on has said the eye tracking is spectacularly good. Even though I think like the eye tracking that's in the PlayStation VR 2 is pretty darn impressive. They're like, it's Apple. They got the leg down even more. They got the precision even higher. That it crosses that line into just, oh, I forgot that was even happening. It just feels natural that, this is the way that we always selected things. Is we just looked at it and made a little pinch with our finger. But one criticism I've seen leveled is there is no, of course, tactile feedback to anything that you're touching or interacting with your hand. You're not actually touching anything. One person was saying, there's I had a little demo where a butterfly comes in and lands on your finger, but of course you don't feel anything. You only see it. So I was kind of like, okay, so there is a reason why you might want controllers or gloves or something to give you that physical feedback.
Ready Player One with the haptic suit and the treadmill
right.
and all that. That's the way we're going, right?
That's right. So I don't know. I don't actually think this is there are the people who just hate Apple, so they're going to criticize, it's $3,500. Who's going to afford that thing? But I'm like, okay, come from the home theater side of it. $3,500 is a lot of money. I'm not going to say it isn't. It's more money than all the other consumer VR headsets that we've been looking at recently. But compared to top end displays with full surround sound, it's not really that bad. It's not that unobtainable. So even if you just use it for entertainment purposes, I can kind of see someone going for this. I wouldn't chide anybody for doing it. I don't know. That's my take. So, did you want to read the second one, which is following along similar lines? Anybody, of course, who's been looking at the news could guess, but do you want me to read it or you read it? Or
No, this is a much shortest one.
It is.
Just a couple of days before Apple's Vision Pro announcement, Meta tried to get out ahead of them with their own mixed reality headset announcement, the Meta Quest 3. It will be available this fall for $500. As anyone might guess, this is the follow-up to the Quest 2 with some trickle-down technology from the $1,500 Quest Pro. Design-wise, the Quest 3 is 40% thinner than the Quest 2, thanks to the new pancake lenses that Meta first used in the Quest Pro. Resolution is roughly 2000 by 2200 per eye, and it's still using LCD panels that go up to 120 Hz refresh rate, but do not support HDR. The head strap design goes back to something more similar to the original Oculus Quest, but using the same strap material as the Quest 2. The sensors on the front are more similar to the Quest Pro. There's now full-color pass-through and depth sensors, all to support augmented reality. There isn't any eye tracking or face tracking on the inside, though. It's all powered by the next generation of Qualcomm Snapdragon, and there are new simplified controllers that include haptic True Touch feedback. You also have the option to use the more advanced self-tracking Quest Pro controllers, $300, if you want to, or they're simply using the hand movement detection to control things. Quest 3 is backwards compatible with all existing Quest software, and Quest 2 will remain in the lineup, going back to its original price of $300.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's... I don't know if we can call it the polar opposite. It's the other end of the scale of trying to make one of the more affordable options. Now, $500, that the base model now of the Quest 3 is going to be 128 gigabytes of storage built in. So if we go back to the original Oculus Quest, that is what the 128 gigabyte version cost, because the base version of the original was 64 gigabytes. So it was $400 for the 64. It was $500 for the 128. So now if we're just going by those label on the box specs, the price is actually the same as the original Oculus Quest. When the Meta Quest 2 first came out, it was $100 cheaper than the original Oculus Quest, but then they increased the price and now they're dropping it back down to where it was when they first launched it. So Price-wise, this isn't out of line at all, because we were maybe got used to seeing $400 for the Oculus Quest, $300 originally for the Quest 2, and now it's $500 is the starting price for the Quest 3, but it really isn't out of line. Those pancake optics really have been quite successful. As far as I can tell, Apple in their Vision Pro is using something kind of similar, though theirs is a 3-element instead of a 2-element, like the pancake optics that Meta has been using. But that has been pretty darn impressive, cutting down the physical size, cutting down the weight. That means there's not only less weight on the front of your face, but a bit less of the lever effect of having it farther out in front of your face. So everything is more compact. I think this is going to be quite a bit more comfortable to use. One of the criticisms I had of the Quest 2 was that, the new head strap that was included was not good. I said immediately you have to pay the $50 to get the better strap, which up to the price immediately. But I actually thought the original Oculus Quest head strap was pretty darn good. So I'm glad to see them go back to something more similar to that design, because hopefully it won't, demand that you pay extra money for a replacement head strap this time. So again, I'm maybe more excited about this Quest 3 than some of the early takes that I've seen on this. It's pretty obvious what Meta is aiming at with their headsets. They've chosen a direction. They're going full augmented reality work in a virtual environment. So they're bringing that full color pass through the depth sensing and the haptic feedback, which is something that the Vision Pro isn't going to have. So I can see, it's kind of nice that we have these two quite similar, but very different price point, very different level of entry, and slightly different approaches to what they think the mixed reality future is going to be. But what are your thoughts on it, Joe?
Again, I think that these are fun to play with. I think that when the technology gets to a much more advanced state, look at what wearing the Google Glass, right? Something that's really small in front of you, beam it right into your eyes, don't need this huge thing. Then, I could see it being more widely adopted. Until then, I think it's going to be a little while before it's more than an interest or a curiosity.
All right, fair enough. And yet, we can see from Meta's progression through their various Quest headsets how through the iterations we're getting closer and closer to that. It's not going to be bulky. It's not going to feel heavy. It's going to get less and less noticeable. So I'm happy to see that progression. I think each of these is a valuable step. So I'm not poo-pooing any of this stuff. I think Tom probably would, because he's not all that into. Although he got a pair of Quest 2 headsets, because when they first came out at $300, they were a darn good value.
And they're sitting in the corner of the room now, right?
They are
so
now.
It's I don't want to say it's a gimmick, but I'm just saying it'll be fun for a little while.
That's true. So we had one last news story if you want to hit us up with that.
Atlanta DTH is releasing the first and, for now, only fully certified NextGen TV external tuner, the ADTH NextGen TV box. There's a name. Mm-hmm. Being fully certified means it supports the broadcast DRM that many ATSC 3.0 broadcasters have decided to implement. The box is a single tuner that is compatible with both ATSC 3.0 and 1.0 signals. And while they hope to add DVR functionality with optional add-on USB storage, it won't ship with the capability out of the box. Great. It's an over-the-air tuner that can't record anything.
Yeah, and a single tuner at that. You can't even watch one thing on one channel and do the channel flashback to another channel. It's nope, it's one tuner.
Regular price will be $125 when it starts shipping in July, but you can pre-order for $85 ahead of its release. So,
the thing about this is that it shouldn't have been necessary, but the broadcasters have decided to implement, not all the broadcasters of NextGen TV, but some of them have decided to implement DRM, digital rights management, because they're worried about the piracy, I guess. I don't know. That seems like such an antiquated idea to me at this point. Why do we still have to end up dealing with that? But this brings a question to my mind, which is there were TVs that had ATSC 3.0 tuners built right into them that predated some of the DRM specification having even been finalized. So even TVs, probably not the ones that came out this year or the ones that are going to come out in 2024, but ones that came out a handful of years ago, they might not even be compatible with some over-the-air channels. That seems insane to me, but I guess this is the solution, $100 solution, basically.
So I bought early on in the HDTV world. I had a 36-inch tube TV, 4:3 ratio, and the only way we could get HD on there was to go out and buy LG or Zenith set-top box that hooked up to an antenna, and you had to figure out, channel 58.1 was where their digital signal was. Couldn't record anything. It looked great. It really was an amazing picture. What am I going to get out of ATSC 3.0? That's going to be a benefit to me as a consumer.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the higher resolution, it's the HDR. That's the promise of what we want to get from it. We're seeing sometimes they don't go for the 4K resolution because the cameras are still 1080p, but at least we can get some HLG out of it. And yeah, I don't know. All along, because I've been not in depth following the development of ATSC 3.0, but since I'm into this whole home theater tech sphere, I come across the news as it's being released, and it's I think they had the very understandable idea of we really want to plan for every contingency of what we want this system to do, and fell into the trap of over planning. That's what it feels like to me at this point with next gen TV. It was oh yeah. You kind of forgot the tech sphere approach of at some point you just got to put the thing out in the world and then iterate on it, which, yeah, it feels like over planning.
Yeah, and I'm all for avoiding any kind of a format war or anything like that by planning, right? If you look back at one of the most successful technology introductions was DVD, right? It's still around today. There was no competition for it. They learned from the beta of the VHS. The Blu-ray HD DVD that came after was a problem, but that where they got every manufacturer on board, all doing the same thing, and they all followed the same prescription. That's the way they should roll out.
I guess it's just too many companies involved when it comes to over-the-air free broadcast TV. There's just too many companies to hound them all into actually agreeing. So I don't know. It at this point feeling like a little bit of a bust, but we'll see where it goes. Eventually we'll get there, because eventually we'll want something a little bit better than standard dynamic range 1080i at the best for our broadcast TV. So with that, we had one comment that I'll just quickly run through. Mike wrote into us to say he enjoyed our lighthearted take. That was Tom and myself talking about the Blackened American whiskey and their black noise sonic enhancement process of blasting their barrels with Metallica playlists. But joking aside, Mike assures us it's darn good whiskey, and it has won a bunch of awards. So, he's like, would it still taste the same if the barrels had only had low volume Linda Ronstadt albums played at them? Yes, it would. It would still taste the same if it had no music played at it at all. But regardless, tongue in cheek there, all of it. But he says, hey, not bad whiskey. So there you go.
Well, one, that's marketing for you, and I think you got to go back to Sammy Hagar and the Cabo Wabo tequila is kind of one of those first celebrity endorsed or branded type. And now there's so many of them out there that every rock star or Hollywood icon needs to have their own brand of alcohol for you to buy.
Oh, of course. Yeah. No, I'm fine with that kind of fun marketing, because even on their own website, they're not trying to take it too darn seriously. So why don't we dig in? This is AV Rant. We do ostensibly answer home theater and AV questions on this podcast. We're getting close to an hour into it, but that's all right, because we've had a new person to introduce, and that person in Joe gets to skip the line because Joe had a question he wanted to ask. And why don't we talk about that first? Normally we just do first in, first out, but I think today we can make an exception. So, Joe, you're our first question asker this week.
Appreciate that. So, and Rob, I just like bouncing off ideas off of you. So,
of course,
got a home theater we're getting ready to do for an assisted living. They have exterior walls that they do not want to penetrate. They don't want for fire protection reasons, things like that. So, we need to go with on-wall surround and rear speakers. I'm still planning to use the HSUs for the front LCR, but was looking for some ideas for a wide area coverage, side and rear speakers that would be on wall. One thought was the Klipsch Reference Premier 2 series, RP502S2s, a little spendy, MSRP of $900 a pair, but any other suggestions for that?
Right. So, I mean, that is a bipole configuration speaker. It is being Klipsch and part of the Reference Premier 2 now series. Definitely got the high sensitivity. So, I mean, I'm right there with you. I think that's probably one of the better options. It is being the trapezoidal shape, not like the skinniest speaker, right? So I don't know how much protrusion from the wall is going to be allowed, but it's not like the ultra slim type of design. But yeah, my experience with the Reference Premier series, now I haven't really dug into the Premier 2, the updated series. My experience with the Reference Premier series was that I thought it was definitely sort of a step up for Klipsch in their sound quality. It didn't have as much of that noticeable sort of U-shaped response that we're pretty familiar with from Klipsch. They had toned that down a bit. I thought they had refined the treble in the original Reference Premier series, and from the reviews from some reviewers that I trust of the Reference Premier 2, and some of them have taken measurements showing possibly the most linear response that I've seen measured from Klipsch speakers. So given that the HSU in-wall speakers, despite being horn loaded and high sensitivity, are pretty darn flat in their response, they're reasonably neutral. I don't think there'd be a problem matching up the Klipsch Reference Premier 2 on-wall surrounds with those. And the bipole design, I wouldn't anticipate being any sort of problem, even if you're going for an Atmos setup. So if the price isn't a problem, I think those are a darn good choice. But yeah, to like you were saying, bounce some ideas. Like the other one is in Klipsch's Reference Premier series, they have their dedicated on-wall speakers, and these are the super slim type of design where they're, I think, 3.25 inches from front to back. So if you need the least amount of protrusion, still relatively high sensitivity. I mean, there's only so much you can do, laws of physics, right? So being that physically thin, they're not quite the same sensitivity and definitely not the same sort of power handling that you get with the full Reference Premier 2 full bookshelf or full surround speakers. But yeah, those Klipsch Reference Premier on-wall speakers, not super cheap, but something like the RP240D, which is the MTM design out of there. You know, retail price on those $420 each, so not tremendously cheaper than a pair of the bipole surrounds, but like Crutchfield is selling them for $350 each, so that gets the price a little bit more reasonable, and the form factor might work a little bit better. And then just for fun, like finding good, relatively neutral, high sensitivity and high power handling in case you need the high output in on-wall speakers, like that's a bit of a challenge. I assume that's why a person like you even thought, oh yeah, maybe I'll bounce this idea off the AV Rant guys and see if they have anything to say. The only real thing I could come up with, like in the consumer space, is Aperion's new Theatris on-wall speakers. Very different design, of course. These are using the folded ribbon air motion tweeters. But there you've got, 94 dB sensitivity and 400 watt power handling. So in terms of just getting you the high sensitivity and really loud output capabilities from a slim on-wall design, that comes with a nice mounting bracket as well. But yes, Joe, you didn't get to see that on YouTube because I was showing images of the speakers, but he made the motion that they're a little spendy because $950 each, so it's over double the price of getting a pair of the Klipsch surrounds. So I don't know, myself. I couldn't come up with a ton more because I was thinking maybe Sunfire, again, using the air motion tweeters and a fairly high sensitivity design. But you go to Sunfire's website now and they're just like, nope, we don't have any speakers in our lineup anymore. Their website is just bare at this point. So it's kind of slim pickings. I don't know if any of that floats your boat.
Yeah, for this particular theater application, it's 3 rows. We're looking for high efficiency. We're going to be running off of a receiver. So I think the initial thought on the Klipsch Reference Premier 2s may be the way we go.
Yeah, and I would back that because, like I say, sort of the initial apprehension sometimes mixing Klipsch speakers with any other brands is that there is sometimes that characteristic Klipsch sound that isn't necessarily going to be the most fantastic timbre match. But I've been pretty impressed with the Reference Premier, and if the measurements and reviews from people that I've trusted are to be trusted, then Premier 2 has gotten even more neutral. So I wouldn't anticipate too much problem. And if you got even sort of just half decent rim correction that could be applied, I think you'd be able to get a pretty good timbre match out of that. So there you go.
Sounds good.
Not surprising Joe was right on the mark, and there we go. But never hurts to get a second opinion, right?
Absolutely. So the next question I had kind of tied into another podcast I enjoy listening to, Stuff You Should Know.
Yep.
Recently did a whole episode about smell-o-vision. So there's a company in Spain, Olorama, great name, selling scent generators that can synchronize with movies either through their PC software or their Blu-ray disc integrator. They also have VR and professional products plus scent manager software, so you can program your own scents to go along with any content that isn't Olorama's collection. Is this the next home theater upgrade? This is like D-Box for your nose, right? I mean,
I suppose, yes.
If you look at their website, they have a whole action movie set of scents. That's everything from burning rubber to gunpowder to
just what I
melted plastic. And I'm like, yeah, I really want my theater to smell like melted plastic. My wife's in the room. She's going to freak out while the house is on fire. So I can see it is a whole nother scent. It does bring you maybe more into the movie experience. But yeah, I don't think so. And it's not cheap.
No, it is not. Seeing the prices that are listed on their website, these are thousands of dollars for the various smells. So they have like these different ones that I guess it's kind of like vials of scent. I mean, I guess it's almost like kind of like perfume bottle types of things, right? But the basic that they have specifically for home theater is 20 different scents that I imagine can be sort of mixed together, perhaps somewhat. But that's like almost $5,500 that they've got listed, at least on their website. All the way up to getting 40 different smells is $19,000. So this is not just drop a few things out of what you found in your couch and have some fun with it. This is pretty special. You got to commit to this if this is what you're gonna do. Also, I'm definitely hoping that one of the movies that is not in their collection is Back to the Future 2, because I don't want to experience that that what happens to Biff at the end of that chase on
the manure
skateboard.
scene. Yes,
I could do without that. I'm fine imagining what he was smelling as opposed to actually having that scent puffed into my room by whatever.
I have teenage boys. I get enough smells in my theater.
Sure, I was also noticing, like, just again, this is just on their website, so I didn't dig into this with a fine tooth comb or anything, but a fair amount of it seems kind of outdated on their website. Like, they have no mention of Ultra HD whatsoever. It stops at Blu-ray. They mention, like, one of the compatible players is Oppo's Blu-ray player. I'm like, well, that's going to be a challenge.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, smell-o-vision has been an idea for a while, right? That's going back. I don't know when that first started. Probably when the first movies came out. Somebody thought of that.
Yeah. They talked about Scent of Murder, which was a film made in Spain, where it was just like the 3D tricks where they lingered too long on stuff sticking out of the screen. Right. They would linger on like loaves of bread coming out of the oven just so you could have time to smell it and be part of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I really don't need directors trying to make movies that are smell focused.
Well, and I mean, of course, anything like this system, I mean, those vials of what amounts to like a sort of perfume, like those...
How long does that last?
Yeah, how long does it last? You would have to refill them, I would assume.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
I don't know. I didn't see prices listed for like replacement vials or anything like that. So I don't know. I kind of feel like you'd have to have money to burn to go for it at the prices that are listed on their website anyway. For me, this is pretty tough to say. Yeah, just go on a lark, give it a try.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay.
We're going to do an Infinite Gary question next, so I'm excited. Yes.
This is your first time guest co-hosting with us. It is a rite of passage. It was a necessity to have you read an Infinite Gary question.
Appreciate that. Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer was shot entirely on 65mm film, a combination of IMAX and Panavision, much like Dunkirk and Tenet. But portions were shot on an all-new black and white IMAX film stock, manufactured by Kodak and developed by Photochem. And after years of only manufacturing digital IMAX cameras, brand new IMAX film cameras and VistaVision film cameras are being made, thanks to the crop of filmmakers like Nolan, J.J. Abrams, Jordan Peele, who prefer shooting on film and have enough clout and success to make it financially viable. Gary wants to know, are we interested to hear our thoughts about all of that?
Yeah. Here's what I would say. We still don't have digital cameras quite yet that can capture the full resolution capability of the very best IMAX film cameras. Now, we're not far off. we're getting pretty close. And other filmmakers like Michael Bay and who is the other one who's shooting a lot of things on digital IMAX cameras. Now, I mean, there's a number of filmmakers who are Denis Villeneuve, right, for the Dune films and that.
Dune, yeah.
So they're shooting in IMAX, but digital IMAX cameras. So I can see where Nolan, J.J. Abrams, Jordan Peele, I can see where they're coming from in that there is still a technical advantage still existing on the 70 millimeter IMAX film. And yet, as people have pointed out, there are limitations on that film when it comes to HDR, that the digital versions are exceeding them in that particular facet of just the capture. So, like, to me, it always makes sense to do your initial capture of whatever you're doing, and whether that's like in the camera that's shooting the original images to bringing it to the digital intermediate when you're doing all the editing and things like that. Like, it always makes sense to capture as much as you possibly can, because then you have more headroom to manipulate, to crop, to alter shots as you please, because you're starting with the greatest amount of information. So purely on a technical level, I can absolutely appreciate where the filmmakers are coming from. On that side, I'm not sure what your thoughts are, Joe.
So I'm surprised we didn't mention Tarantino and all of this also.
Well, he's not doing so much IMAX, though, right? He's doing film, but not so much IMAX.
Big film proponent, talking about lenses and things like that. But the other side of it is that no matter how you capture it, one, I want you to make a good movie, tell a good story, all those side of things. Capture it however you want. It's still going to get to us digitally, right? It's still going to be, whether it's in the commercial cinema, at home, on disc, on streaming, on Kaleidoscape, whatever it is, we're still going to get it digitally one way or another. So there's that conversion process that's going to happen no matter what. If they're more comfortable shooting on it and it helps those directors make a better film, great. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, what the other aspect, which is completely outside of pure technicality, I've always felt there's something to be said for, even if they're self-imposed, restrictions when it comes to making art. Because when they are actually shooting on film, there is limited time, right? Like they were saying how the IMAX cameras that they've been using to date, you basically have 3 or 4 minutes. That's as much film as you can load into one of those cameras.
You have to reload the whole thing, and how long does that take?
You got to reload, reset, do the whole thing. And then they're saying now some of these new ones that, thanks to these directors who are fans of the film IMAX cameras, smaller, lighter, quieter, and can hold more film. So they're wanting to expand what can be done with the IMAX cameras, and yet there's something, I think, to be said for, even if it's basically self-imposed restrictions, not so much that I think, if you're limited to shots that can only be 3 or 4 minutes long, that's somehow automatically going to improve things. Obviously, it's not automatic, but I think there's something to be said for everybody on that set being aware that you can't just let the cameras run like you can with the digital cameras.
There's urgency to it.
Like, you have to be on the ball. Every department has to be on the ball, because when they call action, it all has to work, because everybody knows how much time it's going to take to reset that shot and how limited the resources are. Even when you've got big budgets like those directors have, it's not unlimited.
Something else, though, is are they filming practical effects, right? Nolan, we kind of are known for that. Jordan Peele, the size of stuff he films is all real on screen. A lot of the J.J. Abrams stuff, man, that's all CGI anyways. And the Denis Villeneuve, same thing, right? It's not like we're really going to Arrakis and filming there and catching everything that's. So I don't know. It depends on the movie, I suppose. But I'm very much looking forward to Oppenheimer coming out pretty soon.
Me too.
So,
and thankfully, I'm living in a place, Langley, British Columbia, one of the 30 locations in the world that still has the 70 millimeter physical film IMAX projectors available and ready to go. So yes, I do intend to see that, just like I saw Dunkirk that way and Tenet that way. So to me, I like it. And I don't mind the changing aspect ratios. It's going to have changing aspect ratios again. I've never minded that. So I'm just hoping that the home release will retain as much of the tall aspect as it can, but it seems like that's getting a little bit few and far between these days. But ultimately, I have a feeling that a director like particularly Christopher Nolan might, until the end of his career, just insist on shooting on film. It feels like there's a little bit of a point of pride almost, or something tied into his sense of identity, like beyond any technical aspect. I think there's something where he's just enamored on shooting on physical film.
And the 5.1, soundtracks also.
Yeah, exactly.
If he's set in his ways and he knows what works for him,
sure.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Kind of.
But I do fully expect that we will get to the point, and I don't think it's truly that many years away at this point, where the digital IMAX cameras are going to be able to equal and surpass what the film IMAX cameras can do in every facet. And that if there is an inherent look to the physical film stock, that it will be a basically trivial thing to reproduce that exact same look digitally. So
sure.
at that point, I would say...
press a button, add a filter.
Yeah. At that point, I would say any directors still clinging onto the physical film are doing it more for personal reasons than they are for technical reasons. But I will grant them the argument today that there are still technical advantages to the actual physical film. So I'm on board with it. I don't know if that was what Gary wanted to hear, but that's what you're getting from us, Gary. So I hope that's satisfactory for an answer.
There you go. Next question. Jay has a 7.2.4 speaker configuration in his theater, but with 2 pairs of surround speakers. He's using Golden Ear speakers all around, Triton reference for LCR, 2 pairs of MPX surrounds, a pair for each row, MPX surround backs, and 4 HTR 7000 in-ceiling speakers for the overheads, along with a pair of SVS PB3000 subs. He has been using a Marantz SR7010 to process everything, with 3 Outlaw monoblock amps to power his front 3 speakers, and an Outlaw Model 5000 on hand as well. He's into movies, gaming, and music, and it's time to have all the latest HDMI features. So what should he get to replace his aging Marantz SR7010? He isn't against getting another AV receiver, but could a dedicated pre-pro offer any advantage? He'd need to buy more amplifiers if he went that route, of course. Mm-hmm. Price is a factor, as with all of us, and he wants room correction at least equal to Odyssey Multi-EQ XT32 that he already had with his 7010. He'd also love to a fully functional control app. He was thinking maybe he'd just get one of the Marantz new receivers, model Cinema 50 perhaps, but prices have gone up, so what do we recommend? Rob?
Okay, so I mean, my recommendation, and probably not going to be a surprise for folks who know me and the way that I lean when it comes to AV receiver recommendations, pre-pro, dedicated pre-pro versus using an AV receiver as a pre-pro, or what I'm going to recommend in this case, sort of a hybrid between the two, using some of the built-in amplification of an AV receiver, but still making use of the amplifiers that you already own and have on hand, so no extra expenditure there. But I'm going to point you to Denon's X3800H. It's not inexpensive. It's a $1,700 receiver, so it's not down at the under $1,000 like the 3000 series was at one point. But what this has is everything you need. Right, every HDMI port on this is HDMI 2.1, 40 gigabits per second bandwidth, but able to handle any of the gaming things that you might want to do on that front. Like Denon and Marantz, still stable, right? Things actually work the way that you expect them to. Relatively few glitches. There were a handful of things people pointed out that when they really dug into them when they first came out, but the recent firmware update that came out that added Dirac capability, the optional add-on Dirac capability, fixed any of the other issues that people were having. Some things with the pre-outs, particularly that tactile transducer pre-out that wasn't working right when it first came out of the box, but now that is working correctly. So then you've got, 4 subwoofer pre-outs, which is a little bit unusual on things where you have, you can actually set different distances and levels for each of those 4 subwoofer pre-outs. And then a feature that I think you might appreciate, even though Tom and I never genuinely thought this was a necessity. It's one of those things you can measure with a audio analyzer, but we would defy anybody to genuinely hear in a blind listening test. But there were on the previous models, Denon's, where you could put it into dedicated preamplifier mode, which would turn all of the receiver's amplifiers completely off and essentially just leave you with the RCA pre-outs and nothing else, completely electrically disconnected the built-in amplifiers to get noise down as low as it could possibly go. And some people would point out, okay, if you used a mixture in those cases, that meant you couldn't use the dedicated preamplifier mode. If you were, say, powering your overheads and your surround backs, which is what I would recommend to you, power your overheads and your surround backs with the built-in amplifiers, connect external amplifiers to the other main floor level channels, but then for those other amplifier channels that weren't being used inside the AV receiver, you could measure a little bit of, floor level noise that was way down there in the background that Tom and I would say is never going to be audible, but some people worried about it. So Denon listened. On the X3800H, there is a feature where you can tell it which channels are pre-out only, and you can electrically disconnect each of the channels one by one if you want to. So if you were worried that I'm going to power my front, left, center, right with external amplifiers, and I don't want any electricity going to the left, center, right built-in amplifiers of the AV receiver, you can do that now on the X3800, and you don't have to worry that there's going to be any sort of quiescent noise going through those output transistors on the channels that aren't actually connected to any speakers. So it's got all the features you want. It's a relatively affordable price. I think the Marantz models, the pricing that they've done this year, I think it makes sense on a marketing standpoint. I don't think it's actually justified in terms of, are you paying sometimes $1,000 more for the Marantz sister model for any actual performance increase? And I would argue, no, you're not, that it's really purely a marketing driven decision that they did that. I don't mind so much that they did that to put a little bit more separation between Denon and Marantz in the market, but I don't see a technical good reason to spend that extra money. So if price is a factor, I'd send it to the X3800H. But what does Joe say?
As a dedicated pre-pro amplifier fan and user for many, many years, I really want to disagree with you, but I do think this is a very practical approach if you're trying to keep the cost down. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. As a alternative, what preamps would you recommend that would be options that he could consider?
Yeah, I mean, if price is a factor, and even though he has 9 physical speakers on his floor level, it's 7 channels. So right. This is still, as far as a channel count goes, 7.2.4. I mean, I would probably have to point you to not Marantz's flagship, the
7706,
the AV10. Yeah, it'd be the step down from that. The AV 7706, I think probably makes the most sense. I could maybe. I always have a bit of hesitancy recommending getting one of the Emotiva preamplifiers because it doesn't have the latest HDMI. So that's one thing. He said he wants the latest HDMI for the gaming purposes. It doesn't have it. You would have to rely on eARC back from your display to have... you'd have to plug the game system directly into your display to get the 4K 120 VRR. The Emotiva Pre-Pros just do not pass those signals through. They don't have HDMI 2.0 or 2.1. So, it's tough because if we go over to, say, RCAM, right, that's thousands of dollars more. That to me is a nice solution. You have to pay extra for the Dirac license on the RCAM. You have to pay extra for the full Dirac license on Emotiva as well. There's additional costs on top of it being thousands of dollars more to begin with, which I guess leaves us with Anthem. But again, it's going to be thousands of dollars more. At least they have a full HDMI 2.1 solution with Anthem. So, I mean, it's just tough because when he made it very clear that price is a factor, it's tough for me to say that you're really going to get the audible value out of going dedicated pre-pro. I just don't really see it happening, particularly when you have the option now on the X3800 of, if you're worried about that measurable noise from the unused amplifier channels, you can turn them completely off now.
But if he buys the preamp, he can buy another amplifier.
There is that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, practicality price-wise particularly. And because... I want to dig into that a little bit with you, Joey. I mean, you're saying you're a fan of full-on separates. That is slightly counter to the advice that you've heard Tom and I say many, many times. I want to hear it straight from you, the full reasoning behind that.
So speaking from a personal perspective, I've gone through Lexicon preamp, Marantz, a number of different preamps, and kind of got away from the integrated amp receiver route for the theater, for, the family room system with the TV. Yeah, I got a Denon receiver down there now. And for a lot of the theaters that I'm putting together, a receiver is a great approach. I'm still so enamored with the idea of separates that At the upper end, it makes sense to me. So in my personal system, I'm using the Marantz 8805 as the current preamp. I had the 8802A before that. I had the 8802 first generation prior to that. And I've kept the same amplifiers the entire time.
Okay.
So I've been able to upgrade the processing, upgrade its capabilities, to see, features and benefits without ever having to disconnect a speaker, right?
Sure.
So it's been a really good path and approach. And if you spend the money on amplifiers, he obviously has, 3 Outlaw monoblocks. So there are reasons that I can see that a preamp is a good way to go. Is it the most practical or the most cost effective? No, not at all.
Well, the other one is just cards on the table. Have you taken one of the newer, like a Denon, maybe not necessarily the 3800, but let's say the 6700 or going all the way up to the new A1H or something like that, put it into its preamplifier mode or use this individual channel preamplifier mode. And actually heard a genuine difference between that and the sister, dedicated pre-pro mode amp that often costs more.
No, and part of the reason for that, two things. One, everything's XLR connections on mine, so it's all fully balanced. So I haven't done that. Previous preamp, I was using one of the Integra DTC 9.8 early HDMI supported preamps. And could you hear a difference? Maybe, maybe not. Is my hearing that good anymore?
Well,
hard to say.
Yeah.
But, there's something to be said for 9 monoblock amplifiers and a rack of gear with a preamp next to it.
When it comes to
it's
gear
just
lust,
sexy and it looks exactly. That's what it is, right? It's like, man, I just want a bunch of gear and a big old rack. And I could just put a receiver in a cabinet and do the same thing. But this is cooler, right?
Well, yeah. I think because there are always we got some YouTube comments and stuff. It's usually YouTube comments because where else are you going to get the negative comments just thrown so freely? But usually when I personally or Tom has received criticism for our advice of predominantly, usually, and I won't say always because there have been the times when we've suggested a dedicated pre-pro to someone, but it's rarer coming from us. But the assumption that often, I think, strictly because it has XLR outputs as opposed to only RCA, that somehow automatically makes it sound better, or that because the pre-pro version costs more, which Tom and I will hold steadfast to saying that's because of economies of scale, not because of some genuinely different internals as far as the preamplifier section goes. That they're just... It has to sound better. It just has to, because it's more expensive than its XLR outputs, and we just don't buy it. Like, the measurements don't bear that out, as far as we can tell.
But as a marketing guy, I can very much appreciate the importance of differentiating and flagship selling and having a top-tier product that makes it different. So, there is a certain amount of cachet that even before you turn it on, just look at all that gear. Right?
From the fun side of it, I have equipment in my theater that from a technical standpoint, I absolutely do not need and cannot justify as a need in my theater. I just wanted it, and it brings me joy to have it. And I think Tom and I have been pretty consistent in saying that on this podcast. We don't have any problem with someone doing that. Where we get our backs up a little bit is when it's advice to someone else who's saying price is a factor, and if I don't spend thousands of dollars more, am I missing out? And our experience, our subjective experience, Tom and our subjective experience, and the objective measurements that from places that we trust, like Audioholics. I think Gene does a fantastic job on the objective side of measuring what comes out of preamplifier sections of AV receivers and dedicated pre-pros. Like, it just doesn't bear it out that there's some massive difference in noise or signal clarity or channel crosstalk or something. He's like, he measured what came out of that A1H Denon, and it's like, it's every bit as clean as what's coming out of the Marantz Amp 10 and other more esoteric dedicated pre-pros that cost thousands of dollars more than what the Marantz is doing.
And it depends if you're looking at it as a consumer, as an installer, as a manufacturer, if you're thinking with your head or your heart or your wallet. I agree with you. I think that that Denon 3800 is a absolutely excellent choice. I still think a preamp would look cooler.
All right, we're on board there, but we did reach an agreement, and no disagreement that when the price is a determining factor, it's pretty tough to beat the value that you're getting there. And I like that you can just, if it just makes your heart happy, you can turn the internal amplifiers completely off, one channel at a time now. Oh, the joy. So there you go.
All right, next question. Andrew. Andrew has his media room set up in his basement. He's got 2 acoustic issues to deal with and a potential solution in mind that he'd like to double check with us. Mm-hmm. First, there's too much reverb in the room. He has partially addressed this by putting down 2 area rugs, using an overstuffed plush couch for the seating, and installing 4 acoustic panels. It has helped, but it isn't quite enough. He can add 2 more acoustic panels, but that's the max his wife will tolerate.
Fair enough.
Second, the upstairs can easily hear the theater playing, and if you're in the theater, you can easily hear people walking upstairs. The basement ceiling is just a basic drop tile ceiling with no insulation or anything above it. He is not expecting full soundproofing, but he'd like to reduce the amount of sound transfer. So he came across a suggestion online to completely fill all of the joist bays above his drop tile ceiling with cheap insulation. I've heard that before. Then leave a few of the drop ceiling tiles out and just cover those spots with stretch fabric. That's supposed to allow the insulated ceiling bays to act as bass traps, hopefully fixing his first problem. And with the ceiling joist bays completely filled with insulation, it's also supposed to muffle the sound transfer, hopefully fixing his second problem. What do we think? Too easy to be true.
I want to let you take the lead on this answer because this seems to be right up your alley.
Yeah. So if you're hearing footsteps above you, insulation's not really going to impact that very much. Lots of insulation is going to help keep the room more comfortable, maybe, but it's not going to help with the low frequencies getting transferred, because that's actual impact and that's vibration being transferred.
Structural vibration.
Exactly. It's not acoustic transfer through the air, right? So I don't see that. Leaving a couple of them open, yeah, you might get some bass trapping impact out of it, possibly inside the room, but it's not going to address the footfall issue.
Yeah, and I mean, that was absolutely going to be the same answer I would have provided, and sadly so. I wish I could tell you it was that inexpensive and relatively easy to solve both of the issues that you've mentioned, but I just feel like setting expectation-wise, you would be disappointed in terms of particularly the sound transfer results. I don't think you're going to get the type of sound muffling just from basically putting something fluffy into all the joist bays. The reason that we put insulation into our soundproof construction type walls and ceilings is just to reduce resonance inside of that empty cavity. That's really all the insulation is there for. The stuff that is marketed and sometimes sold at a more expensive price as, soundproofing insulation, it doesn't do anything magical. It doesn't suddenly make it so that you can't hear through those walls if all you did was add that insulation. I suppose it could have a minimal effect in muffling some voice intelligibility, similar to just if you put a pillow between you and the person you're talking to, but you're still going to hear, noise coming through both directions. It's not going to be a satisfactory soundproofing solution, in my opinion. I wouldn't expect, and it sounds like Joe agrees on that front.
Yeah, I think if I was going to try this, maybe what I do is use drop tile ceiling, assuming it can support the weight. I would use double layers right above the drop tiles, and I would fill every single row of the drop tile except maybe the last one, and let that work as a place for the bass to go up into and get absorbed into it somewhat. I don't see it working great, but just an idea. Right.
So, I mean, in terms of, say taking some of the advice from like the company that Tom and I often reference, Soundproofing Company, like they would tell you, as far as reducing the footfall noise from above you coming down into the theater, the place to do that would be the upstairs floor.
Yeah, carpet.
Carpet upstairs, or installing, like a rubberized mat directly over the upstairs subfloor and then putting flooring on top of that, which would be a fairly extensive renovation. That would mean pulling up whatever floor finishing you have, putting down the rubberized layer on top of the subfloor, and then relaying down, a new finished floor, or yes, probably the easier one, having carpet installed if it isn't already installed up there. If none of that is viable, I have seen them offer the advice of from the underside, installing a layer of green glue, sometimes 2 layers of drywall directly to the underside of the subfloor. So adding damping and mass to the underside of the floor that's above you will do some reduction.
If you want to spend money and fix this situation, you're going to need to float the ceiling, right? Use nothing but the spring hanging down, attach your drywall to that, get rid of the drop tile entirely.
Right.
But it's not going to be cheap. Each of those things, each ceiling hanger costs a good amount of money, and that's going to be quite a bit of work to do.
And so what about the combination of essentially through damping glue like green glue, laminating layers of mass, be that MDF or OSB or drywall, to the underside of the ceiling above you, so adding some mass and damping to the footfall side of things, insulation as we would normally have in the ceiling joist bays just to reduce that resonance, and then keeping the drop tile ceiling but switching to acoustic ceiling tiles, which would address his first issue, right? You've essentially made the entire ceiling surface. If you can go for 2-inch thick ceiling tiles or 1.5-inch thick acoustic ceiling tiles, those are basically acting like 1.5 or 2-inch absorption panels. They do a pretty good job on treating the acoustics inside your room while still retaining your T-bar ceiling. You're replacing the ceiling tiles. Not necessarily inexpensive, but there are options that don't have to cost an arm and a leg as far as that goes. And then, I mean, the thing we've talked about, it is a hassle and a half, but a layer or 2 of mass-loaded vinyl above that. Yeah, Joe's shaking his head if you're not watching the video version. Your experience on that, maybe you can enlighten me a bit.
And the industry's kind of gotten away from the mass-loaded vinyl. I mean, it can help, but it is heavy, ugly, hard to work with. You're going to break a neck putting that thing up. So
and pretty easy to short circuit is the problem. And to do it properly, you want to tuck tape all the seams, which is difficult to do when it's overhead because you're working on a flexible surface that doesn't want to cooperate, and it's heavy, and there's an odor sometimes to it.
If you do go the acoustic drop tiles, do some research, make sure you buy the right ones, and do not try and paint them. You need to use ones that are already colored the way they're going to be, because you can, again, short circuit that also.
Yeah, and I mean, they do have the acoustic ceiling tiles with the mass-loaded backing on those. Now, that leaves gaps with where the T-bars are present. So I don't consider it a fantastic expenditure of money. Again, it's like it dulls particularly some of the vocal range, right? You get some of that vocal range transfers is dulled, just like, as you can imagine. You put any sort of barrier between someone talking and the person on the other side, and it muffles it somewhat, right? But because there are gaps, you're not getting like full soundproofing. So I don't know. It's tough for me to feel really gung-ho, because, I mean, even if you're doing it yourself, it's not inexpensive to do the things that I mentioned, and it is labor intensive. All of those are labor intensive, because doing the green glue and mass of whatever form, be it drywall or OSB or whatever, essentially laminated to the existing subfloor from the underside, like, that's a lot of cutting. That's a lot of cutting and gluing and screwing, and that is labor intensive, which means it costs money if you're paying someone else to do it, or it's a lot of your time, and not inexpensive even on the materials side for you to do it yourself. But if you're unwilling to treat the floor itself on the upper side, like, I don't know any other way to even reduce the footfall noise.
You need to decouple or you need to damp, right? I mean, it's one or the other, and both ideally.
Yes. I wish we had happier, cheaper, easier news for you, but setting your expectations realistically, just filling all those ceiling joist bays with insulation, I don't think it's going to get you the results that you want. So the one thing I would say, like, if we set expectations realistically, try to get away from like hoping that this is really going to be like soundproofing in any form. Like, acoustic ceiling tiles, definitely doable. You can replace the ceiling tiles you have with acoustic ceiling tiles. You don't even have to replace the existing grid T-bars. So that is doable and will, at least in part, address your first concern. So that is something I feel pretty okay recommending. And then if you're able to do something to the floor itself upstairs, that's going to be the most reasonable way to address the footfall noise. So I don't know. Hopefully that helps.
Just don't play it very loud and they won't hear it upstairs.
I don't know if that was the fun. None of us are looking for that.
Yeah, don't do that. Next question. Will wants to find an outdoor waterproof A-Lady speaker that works with Apple Music. He had an Echo speaker and even found a rechargeable battery pack that made it convenient to use outdoors. But that combo didn't survive the elements, and he wants a speaker that his family and guests can use during pool parties without any concerns. So he got an Ultimate Ears Mega Boom that appeared to check all the boxes, only to discover that he had actually removed Apple Music support via A-Lady commands after it was released.
God. Don't you love a firmware update that takes away something you wanted?
Software's the best. So now he's inquired with Sonos about the Sonos Move and Sonos Roam, but they have failed to provide a clear answer about being able to use Apple Music via A-Lady voice control. These portable Sonos speakers can definitely use A-Lady, and they can definitely use Apple Music, but similar to the Ultimate Ear speakers, he's worried the Apple Music support is only via the Sonos app, and he specifically wants his guests to be able to just say, A-Lady, play whatever. For the time being, he signed up for Amazon Music Unlimited, but his entire family is in the Apple ecosystem with a subscription to Apple One, and they all prefer Apple Music. So what, if anything, is the solution? Rob.
This isn't one that you know off the top of your head, Joe?
If I'm outdoors, I've got JBL little tiny speakers that we carry in and out with us. We play them off the phone. I'm not big on the A-Lady side of things personally. So especially if your family's already entirely in the Apple ecosystem, who's hanging on the A-Lady? Really, Is that you, Will? Is that you that wants it?
So I'm going to caveat my answer with there is a possibility I'm wrong, but as far as I know, the Sonos portable speakers aren't able to let you use the A-Lady voice assistant to control Apple Music directly. You can use the Amazon voice assistant, but just like you said, you can use Apple Music, but as far as I know, Apple Music doesn't work with that voice assistant on the Sonos portable speakers. There's a possibility I'm wrong about that, but that is what I'm aware of, the situation being when it comes to those two services, neither of which is under Sonos's control, right? They don't get to decide who's willing to work with whom. So as far as I know, the only speakers, portable speakers I know that let you use the Amazon voice assistant to control Apple Music directly are Amazon's own Echo speakers. That's the only one I know that will do it, which, like you said, originally that's what he started with, right? He had an Amazon Echo, found a portable battery, but it just didn't survive the elements because they aren't built. There is no Amazon Echo speaker that's built to be waterproof, that you can throw in a pool and have it survive, or leave it out in the rain and have it survive. They don't have one. That's kind of a surprising gap in their lineup in a way. Like, they seem to have an Echo speaker for virtually any situation, and it's a bit of a surprise to be like, they don't have a weatherproof one? That's kind of weird. So who knows? Maybe the true solution is wait and hope that they introduce a waterproof Echo. But I again, some bad news coming from us as far as an answer goes. I don't have a solution that you just overlooked. I don't know of one either that checks every box in here. So it would either be, just get inexpensive Echo speakers, try not to leave them out in the rain, don't throw them in the pool, and try to, give them a modicum of cover when you take them outside and use them that way, because to have the experience that you're saying that you want, those are the only smart speakers I know of that let you do that. The only alternative would be to just say, okay, I'm going to have to say goodbye to using Amazon's voice assistant specifically and be okay with using a different voice assistant, because Sonos has their own voice assistant. Hey, Sonos. They rolled their own. They created their own. But because they weren't able to get all these third parties to work together, they're like, well, the only solution is create another standard, right? So they did that. They have their own Hey Sonos, or you could go with, one of Apple's smart speakers, but none of those are waterproof either. So I don't know if that's really a good solution. So, yeah, I mean, I was looking at Bose, I was looking at other ones, and nobody has the functionality that you're asking for as far as I was able to come across. So I don't think you overlooked the solution staring you in the face or anything like that, and I don't have a fantastic one. The only other thing I can think of is it isn't something I would recommend. I don't think it's going to be the seamless experience that you want, but you can pair an Amazon Echo speaker to a different Bluetooth speaker to act as the actual audio output device. So you could have a portable waterproof Bluetooth speaker that is physically outside, and then an Amazon Echo that is like within earshot, and you could Bluetooth pair the Echo to that other Bluetooth waterproof speaker and do things that way. But how dependable and works 100% of the time that would be, I have my doubts about that, to be honest. But that, to do exactly what you're asking, is the only solution I could think of. So you might even be able to do that with your Ultimate ears, because you should be able to just Bluetooth pair that with an Echo speaker, and that would be the somewhat convoluted workaround, but let you do what you want to do.
Your family loves Apple, though. Next question, Toke. Part A. We've mentioned how if you co-locate a pair of subs, you get a 6 dB boost in output. Is that also the case if you simply go from a single driver to a dual driver subwoofer? If so, wouldn't it always be preferable to use a dual driver design rather than a single larger driver with the same total surface area?
I want to get your thoughts on this one, Joe. I was working through it mathematically in my head, but
so going back to the car audio days, right?
Yeah.
We'd always say, if you want to go up 3 dB, you either need to double cone area or you need to double power, right? So you could, if you're staying with a consistent amount of power, if you have dual subs. Now, if you are using amplified subs, you're doubling both power and cone area, so you're getting your 6 dB there.
Yeah.
Co-locating them can, depending on where you're putting them in the room, have advantages if you're getting boundary gain off of putting them in a corner, et cetera, et cetera. Wouldn't it always be preferable to use a dual driver design? I think that dual driver designs have advantages if you are trying to get them a certain form factor or have a certain amount of space that you have on the floor. You don't have room for a 15 or an 18. You have room for dual 10s and they stack taller. That's definitely a way you can go.
I think where some of the just on the pure math side is getting a bit thrown is that if we're talking about taking single driver, each one has its own box, 2 of those subwoofers, and we either stack one on top of the other or put them directly side by side, and we get a 6 decibel increase from that. Do we get the same thing if we have one box, one amplifier, but 2 drivers instead of 1? And Joe hit the nail on the head, which is unless you are also doubling the amplifier power as you double the number of drivers, you're not, because you might get a 3 decibel increase by doubling the surface area that's interacting with the air, but unless you're also doubling the amplifier power behind them, it's not giving you the 6 decibel boost. It's maybe giving you the 3 decibel boost. And then there's the side of it is, okay, so if we kept, let's say we take single driver, single amplifier, single cabinet, and then we keep everything the same except we just add another driver on the other side of it, that amplifier is now powering 2 drivers, right? So it's not that you're getting, if it was 500 watts into that single driver before, that you're suddenly getting 1,000 watts into the 2 drivers. That didn't magically happen. You didn't upgrade the amplifier. So just purely increasing the number of drivers in there isn't necessarily even giving you a 3 decibel increase, right? Because you might end up having half the power going to each driver and then doubling the surface area. You're almost back to the starting point as far as that goes.
And there's something to be considered when you're talking about subwoofers, the moving magnet motor of that, the back EMF generated by those, the amount of damping factor that the amplifier might have, is it going to be able to control that many drivers accurately? So there's a lot more than, can we just slap 2 subs in there and use the same amp?
Right, yeah. So ultimately, we are talking about, okay, there is a surface area that we're considering, whether that's a single large diameter driver or multiple drivers, whatever it is, but you can add up what the surface area is. And so that's one factor. And then we have how much amplifier is driving that, how much amplifier wattage is behind that. And then the other factors of, okay, we're getting into multiple voice coils versus a single voice coil, multiple magnets versus a single, there's other things where we don't have 100% efficiency, right? So there's some that of that power is just getting translated into heat instead of actually turning into physical movement. So it's not exactly 1-to-1, 100%, but it isn't as simple as it's always going to be better to just double the number of drivers, because you're not going to get a 6 decibel boost inherently by doing that. If it were 100% efficiency and everything, you would get a 3 decibel boost by doing that. And then if you also double the amplifier power, you're back to getting your 6 decibel boost, but that is now effectively the same as just having 2 subwoofers co-located, right? So we're not actually getting to something where we've stumbled into a little known way to, you know, efficiently get more output without spending the money type of thing. Nope, no free lunch. We didn't
Right,
get that.
and we're not even talking about trying to get uniform bass across multiple seats, right?
Right,
If
of
you
course,
put both
yeah.
your subs in one place as opposed to across the room from each other, yep, we go to that.
It's
Talk
the
about
same
that
as
every
having
week.
a single sub there as far as the uniformity across your seats go, yeah. But yeah,
So-
no free lunch. Sorry.
Part two of his question. He noticed that his 8-channel Crown amplifier is rated to deliver 125 watts, regardless of whether that's into an 8 ohm load or a 4 ohm load. The rated watts per channel output does not increase into a lower impedance load the way many other amplifiers are spec'd to do. Rob mentioned in a YouTube comment that it might be due to the simply being the saturation limit of the output transistors, but it might also be results of a heavily regulated power supply.
Yeah, so you're just curious about how that works. I mean, yeah, you've got a lot of experience with amplifier technology and how that type of specification goes. So what are Joe's thoughts on that one?
It does sound like they're building that amplifier to hit Crown specifically is typically going to be used more in PA or commercial applications, and they're building it to hit a certain spec regardless of what you're hooking up to it, right? So I agree that the power supply is probably getting clamped down on. You're only going to pull so much current no matter what. It doesn't sound like it's trying to do that into the 4 ohm load doubling. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I just wanted to mention as a bit of a tangent, but I think might help shed light on this for you. Gene put out a video as well as a full written review of that Marantz Amp 10, which is a bit of a new design for them, right? It's using the latest ICE block Class D amplifiers, 16 channels, all built into a single chassis. But he was pointing out how on the spec sheet, they're saying 200 watts per channel into an 8 ohm load. Now, Marantz specified that 2 channels driven. Gene, in his tests, he drove 7 out of those 16 channels simultaneously and still hit 200 watts coming from each of those into a very stable 8 ohm load, and almost doubled that. It was like 390 watts or something like that into a stable 4 ohm load. And he was pretty darn impressed by any consumer amplifier, even a $7,000 one. There are amplifiers much more expensive than that don't remain that stable. When you're talking about 7 amplifier channels all being driven simultaneously, that amount of power being possible. This was like a power sweep, so it's 700 or 800 milliseconds, which is still longer than like a lot of industry standard tests that Gene is doing there. This isn't like literally driving the speakers all day at that type of output, but still pretty impressive for anything to have the capacitor banks and the power supplies to be able to do that. But he was pointing out how, because the power supply in that Marantz Amp 10 is so heavily regulated, it's a switch mode power supply, so it's changing rails depending on how much current it needs to supply to any given load at any given time. Because it is so highly regulated and the output of everything is filtered like crazy, that they basically spec'd those amplifiers as high as they go. Like they almost hit like a brick wall at that 200 watts. So then, even if you're willing to accept higher distortion levels, like there is no additional headroom. We're used to our linear Class AB amplifiers where you're saying, okay, the spec is at 0.1 total harmonic distortion or 0.05 or something like that. And how many watts do we get there? But then if we allow it to go up to 1%, 2% total harmonic distortion, there is this extra headroom that's there. Maybe it's only for a short burst. Maybe it's only at 1 kilohertz, but there is this available headroom in there that you could eke out of there. Whereas with the way the Marantz Amp 10 was designed, and not necessarily completely dissimilar to how like some of Crown's Class D amplifiers are designed with their switch mode power supplies, where it's like they specified to like the max, but then there's no headroom above that. It can be designed that way. So basically, like Gene was saying, Marantz had the option of speccing this as a 100 watt times 16 into 8 ohms, and then claiming, but it has 3 decibels of headroom because it'll go up to 200. But because they were able to keep it so clean all the way up to the max and then no headroom above that, they specified it on the spec sheet as 200 watts per channel. But now there's no headroom in that amp, and we're used to there being some headroom. So it could be a not dissimilar thing going on with the way Crown simply chose to specify that amplifier. They could have said, this is 75 watts per channel into 8 ohm, and then it's 125 into 4 ohm, and they wouldn't have been lying. You just kind of play with some of the other parameters in there, and you can absolutely make the spec sheet read that way if you wanted to.
Have you seen that Amp 10? It's a beast.
I haven't seen it in person. No,
I got to check it out down at Sound United, and yeah, that back panel is just stuffed with connectors.
No kidding. Nice.
Next part of the question: are there any drawbacks to making your speakers or subwoofers higher in impedance versus lower? For example, he's seen dual voice coil subwoofers where you have the option to either wire them to create a 2 ohm load or wire them to create an 8 ohm load. Mm-hmm. What is the trade-off there? If the voltage in the signal is going to be the same, wouldn't you save a bunch of current but still get the same output by creating the 8 ohm load? Isn't an amplifier more likely to be current limited and have a tougher time with the 2 ohm load? Absolutely, right? I mean, the lower the impedance, the more current, the more heat, and God, this funny, we used to do this in car audio all the time, right? We would build amplifiers that were 1 ohm mono stable, and you had to run, a 2 gauge power wire to that and hope it could get the kind of current that it needed out of the car's electrical system. But yeah, you could get a lot more power out of them that way, and they would get hot as a blister, but because you're passing so much through them. It's just not really needed in home theater, right? There's not a lot of application for a 2 ohm speaker in this. Some manufacturers are going to design that, but they're taking all of those parameters into consideration when they're building an amplified subwoofer.
Right, yeah. Typically, so if we're just talking about normal passive speakers, our tower speakers, our bookshelf speakers, typically the reason you'll have one that ends up being a 4 ohm nominal or a 6 ohm nominal or something instead of an 8 ohm nominal, you're normally seeing that where the woofers cross over to the mid-range driver. That's often where you're going to find the lowest impedance. And that's because you're driving all of those drivers down there in parallel at that point. So you've got these parallel paths for the electricity to go into. All of those drivers are moving at that crossover range. So you're going to see a lower impedance at that point, and you end up having to say, well, no way around it. The measurements show this is a 4 ohm nominal speaker. That's kind of just the way it is. And in order to bring it up to being an 8 ohm nominal speaker or something, well, that might increase the cost because then you're going to have to do something like maybe a much steeper crossover slope between those so that you're almost having a brick wall between where the woofers come up and the mid-range meets it from, the bottom end of the mid-range driver versus the top end of the woofer, or you're going to simply throw a resistor in there to bring up the overall resistance of the load as a whole, but then you are just wasting some power. That resistor is not producing any sound. It's just turning some of the electricity into heat. So in that sense, you're wasting some of the power of the amplifier just to have it look like an 8 ohm load when you measure the thing, but you're not actually it's not like a true transducer 8 ohm load at that point.
Right, and keep in mind that we're talking about nominal impedance, not playing impedance, right? If you hook up your volt-ohm meter to a speaker, it'll read 3.8, whatever ohms. Try moving that cone in out, see what the numbers do, right? Try doing it faster or slower. The numbers,
right.
You look at an impedance graph, and it's all over the place, what kind of a swing you get on a given speaker. And so, it's math is not as always as simple as current times voltage.
It's certainly not as though any speaker that we're using when we say it's an 8 ohm nominal speaker, it's it's a flat line 8 ohms across every frequency. Not even close. It's going to be quite the mountainous range on most things going there. But I think when we're talking about, okay, I've got an amplifier, I want to hook up 2 or 3 speakers to it or something, right? It's you're probably going to be safer wiring those speakers in series. It's going to be pretty rare that you wire 2 speakers in series, even if they're, higher impedance on the spec sheet. Wire those 2 in series to your amplifier and run into some sort of clipping problem. That's pretty unlikely. Whereas if you wired 3 speakers all in parallel, you very well might run out of current. So I don't know. Is there a downside to just going with the series wiring instead of the parallel if you're trying to connect 2 speaker loads to one amplifier? I can't really think of one, honestly.
Yeah, I've got to kind of go back to physics.
Eventually you run out of headroom one way or another. That's going to be the case. But Yeah, I can't really think of a big drawback in that. I mean, you wouldn't want to wire together like 10 speakers all in series. You'd want to do some kind of combination of series parallel at that point. Yeah. Nah, I don't think so. If I had a dual voice coil subwoofer driver, I'd wire it to be 8 ohms instead of 2.
Next question. Rohan in India. We haven't heard from Rohan for a while. He is back, having recently bought some new gear, and he says he finds himself a bit petrified when it comes to setting it all up and trying to calibrate it. As he watched a bunch of videos and read a bunch of guides about using Room EQ Wizard, but it's all a bit overwhelming. To start, his theater area is roughly 13 feet long by 12 feet wide by 11.5 feet tall, but it's completely open to the rest of the house on the left side. So it's much bigger than that. There's a large window on the right, and every surface is hard and reflective, marble floor, concrete walls and ceiling. He has tried to convince his wife that it would be worthwhile to add some GIC acoustic panels, but there's been no movement on that front, so the room is what it is.
So just before the first question, I will just say to Rohan, if you didn't listen to just last episode, go back there because we talked about like the experience that one of our listeners, and actually I misidentified that listener because his email came in with a very similar looking name on the email to a different listener, and both of their names started with J, so I attributed it to John, but it was actually Jay who wrote in about the gymnasium that he went to that had not that many, not that thick, but panels that were put up there, and just the unbelievable difference that it made. And so even if your wife hearing that experience, I don't know if any help might be there, but yeah, if you're in a large open space, you've got tall ceilings and everything is marble and concrete, yes, putting panels in there would definitely be priority number one in my book.
So first question, they got a new 77-inch LG C2 OLED. He says the only settings changes he made out of the box was setting it to filmmaker mode for every input, and are there any other setting changes he ought to make?
So the big one is just making sure you've taken it out of the power saving, which is not in the picture settings. On the C2, I think it's under the general settings. Like when you bring up all the settings, there's, picture, audio, network, those type of things. And I believe it's under the general settings is where you would find the power saving. So that you want to turn off. So I'm going to refer you over to AV Forums, the guys out of the UK. It's actually the G2 that they did the full list of picture settings for every type of signal that you might be putting in there. They run through all of them in detail, but the G2 settings apply to the C2 100%. You're not digging all the way down into like the full color management system without measurement gear or hiring a calibrator. For the basic picture settings, the G2 settings 100% apply to the C2 as well. So I'll have the link for that in the show notes. You can go through those, but number one would be taking it out of power saving mode. After that, yeah, if you put it in filmmaker mode for every type of input, there isn't really a lot else you need to do to have a pretty darn reasonably accurate image coming at you. That does a good job of turning off all the type of processing that we don't want, all the motion smoothing and noise reduction and edge enhancement and those type of things that we don't want. It turns those off in filmmaker mode, and out of the box, it's pretty reasonably close on all the colors and grayscale and gamma tracking and all those types of things. It's not far off what a calibrator would get you to. Calibrator could get you even closer to absolute perfection to the industry standards, but it's pretty close to set it and forget it, but you just want to turn off the power saving. But we'll have the whole settings for you to go through from AV Forums.
Next question. On the audio side, he got a new Marantz SR6015 AV receiver and a PB1000 Pro subwoofer. He still has his Focal Chorus 726 mains and a CC700 center, along with a pair of Dolly Zensor 1 speakers for surrounds and a Dolly Sub E12F subwoofer. He also bought a UMic 1 measurement microphone, and his budget is now completely spent. Nothing left over to even get a mini DSP 2x4 HD or the Odyssey Editor app, although he could probably find a way to get an app if necessary. So far, all he's done is tried running Odyssey Multi-EQ XT32 from the Marantz receiver itself, and he already knows that he loves dynamic EQ, but he hasn't dug into anything else yet when it comes to measurements or audio calibration. He basically wants a step-by-step set of instructions from us as to how to go about all of this. To start, should he use both his new SVS PB1000 Pro and his old Dolly subwoofer together? He would like to, but the Dolly sub has only basic controls, 0 or 180 polarity switch, no phase knobs, and the only locations for both subwoofers has to be on the front wall. He can move them anywhere along the front wall, but that's it. Nowhere else in his room. You want to stop there and keep going?
We can address that, which is, I get it. You've got a subwoofer you already own. It feels like it would be a waste not to use it. We talk about using dual subs, but in this case, the Dolly sub that you own, it doesn't go as deep. It doesn't keep up in terms of output with the new SVS PB1000 Pro that you have. Given that you would be, in essence, co-locating them. Like, I realize they might be on either side of your TV or either end of your front wall, but they're not going to be across the room from each other, and they're definitely not going to be across your entire space because you've got this entire open space over to the left. This is a case where my honest recommendation is I would just use the PB1000 Pro. I would replace the Dolly sub that you have. I would not try to use both of them together. And given that you have these very clear placement restrictions, but some flexibility, right? You said it could be anywhere along the front wall, but it has to be on the front wall. I would 100%, in your case, do a subwoofer crawl. And you have to set your expectations. You are not going to have ideal bass in every seat in your living room. You just have to put that out of your mind. But for your primary seat, whatever your main seat is, when you're alone and you get to pick the seat that you like best, that's your primary seat, you can get decent results for that seat with one subwoofer. I'm confident, even when it has to be somewhere on the front wall, that you're going to be able to do that for that one seat. So that's a case where you can do the fun activity of you actually put your subwoofer where you would sit, that primary location. If it's unstable, it doesn't have to literally be in your seat. You can push your seat back and put the subwoofer where the seat would be. It's perfectly fine to do that. And then you play a sweep on repeat, and it's perfectly fine for this purpose to just look up a bass sweep, one that goes from, say, 200 hertz down to 20 hertz off of YouTube, good enough for this purpose, and just play that sweep on repeat. And what you are going to do is take yourself to your front wall. We call it the subwoofer crawl because there's the idea that, okay, if the subwoofer is actually in your seat where you would sit, then you would get your ears down by the floor where the subwoofer driver is going to be. But more realistically, you're going to kind of duck walk. You're going to maybe crouch down a little bit and duck walk along your front wall. And what you're listening for is that bass sweep is playing on repeat with the subwoofer where your seat is going to be. And you're listening for that bass sweep to sound as even in volume throughout the entire sweep as you're able to find. You don't want one where the volume is very obviously louder at some frequencies and very obviously quieter at others. You're looking for where it's pretty even in volume throughout that sweep, and then you mark that spot on the floor, and that's where your subwoofer goes on the front wall. And I would 100% in this instance, with the equipment that you have, no further purchases being made, and the type of room that you're dealing with, I don't think it's worth the expenditure of time to try a more sophisticated approach to subwoofer placement and setup than that. Because you're much more limited by your room than you are by your equipment in this case. It's not that there's going to be some kind of magical thing you can do with your U-Mic and Room EQ Wizard in this scenario. You're limited in placement. You're dealing with a bit of an acoustic nightmare when it comes to the room itself, and your limiting factor is not going to be that the subwoofer crawl isn't precise enough to give you optimal results. Is it the optimal way to set up subwoofers in a home theater? No, it isn't. And you've probably seen the videos that are like, don't use the subwoofer crawl. It's not optimal. Like, that's not what it's about. It's about being reasonable when you've got other factors that are much more limiting than the subwoofer itself, and that is where you are right now. So Joe might have different advice on that.
So I'll throw out just another idea, kind of similar approach, but it requires a long RCA cable and a furniture dolly, and one of your kids, because your wife isn't going to help you with this for sure.
Okay.
But put the subwoofer on the furniture dolly, sit in your seat, play a sweep, and just have the kids pull it slowly along the front wall until you find the spot where, like you said, it sounds good, even. That'll work well maybe for one seat. But yeah.
So, I mean, that's the same thing. We're just reciprocal placement. Either you sit in your seat and the subwoofer moves along the front wall, or the subwoofer sits in your seat and you move along the front wall. But either way, it's the same approach.
He's pretty sure he understands from all the online tutorials about how to connect his U-Mic 1 to his computer and load its calibration file into Room EQ Wizard, and take measurements. But step by step, what does he do after that? His PV1000 Pro has its app and 3-band parametric EQ. Other than that, he would need the Odyssey Editor app and or a Mini DSP 2x4 HD to actually apply any changes, right? Yeah, you can measure something, but you then need to adjust something to get the benefit of it, right? Yeah. So I do think that the SVS sub with its app, you can look at just the subwoofer frequencies, play a sweep, get it all set up correctly, look at where the problems are. You're going to want to cut peaks. You do not want to try and boost dips. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems with your subwoofer because dips are usually room modes. Rob, should he just start with the SVS sub, or is there anything else he can do?
I mean, given that he really doesn't want to spend any additional money, at most he might buy the Odyssey Editor app. But I think, again, the limiting factor here, Rohan, is your room. It's 100% your room. There's only so much on the electronic side of things that we can do in here. And honestly, none of it is going to overcome the limitations of the acoustics of your room at this point, in my opinion. You could spend all day measuring in Room EQ Wizard and then spend money on getting a Mini DSP 2x4 HD or some other thing that can apply equalization curves, and you're simply not going to be able to overcome the reflections and reverberation in your room. You're not going to be able to overcome the acoustics that you're dealing with. That there's nothing you can do on the electronic and output side that is going to magically overcome the limitations of your room. So I think since you've already invested in the UMIC 1, since you've already gone through the Room EQ Wizard tutorials and you seem interested in doing this, I don't have any problem with you being like, yeah, I'm going to do what my current system allows me to do, which is measure the results of my subwoofer. I'm going to use that subwoofer crawl technique or pulling the subwoofer along the front of the wall. I'm going to use that technique as my starting point. I'm going to measure what I get after I do that. And yeah, if I notice that, okay, in these two frequencies, there's obvious kind of humps in here, and it doesn't sound any better when I move the subwoofer to a different location on my front wall. There's the rest of the positions are only worse. Some of them have big dips, and I don't want it to be there, or if the peaks in other locations are even higher, so there's no advantage to putting it elsewhere. I found the spot where it's as close to a linear response in that subwoofer sweep as I can get, and now I can use those 3 bands of parametric EQ that I can access through the SVS app, and I can tame out those couple of humps that I've got, and I can have nice, wonderful, flat-looking response, when I measure it, and probably can't hear it, to be honest, but at least you've done the exercise. That way, you've prepared yourself so that if you do improve the acoustics of your room, if you do invest in a Mini DSP 2x4, if you do get to where you have 3 or 4 subwoofers in here and you're using something like the multi-sub optimizer software, you're familiar with having taken the measurements. You're familiar with having connected the UMIC 1 and done the calibration process and those types of things. And you can just have some fun doing this. But my honest answer in terms of what is worthwhile in this situation is I don't even really think you must go through measuring your system, because I don't think there's some magical thing you're going to be able to do electronically that's honestly going to make a world of improvement here. You're dealing with a much bigger limiting factor in the acoustics of your room. But if you want to do it as an exercise, I think it's perfectly fine to start there with that 3-band parametric EQ, and don't worry about the rest of it. Go ahead and run Odyssey off of your AV receiver. I think that spending $20 for the Odyssey Editor app is not such a gigantic expenditure, and it would give you the ability to say, okay, now I can measure each speaker individually in Room EQ Wizard, or I can measure the combination of my front speaker combined with my subwoofer at the front of the room, and I can see what is actually reaching my seat when I play that sweep out of one channel. And if I'm noticing, okay, there's this, even after I've run Odyssey, there's this big drop somewhere, or whatever, you can make some adjustment in that editor app, but it's going to be a bunch of trial and error. So the step-by-step process is do the basics physically that makes sense, and that's going to be the subwoofer crawl in your case, and following as best you can the angle diagrams from Dolby and as far as positioning your speakers. It's going to be running Odyssey Multi-Q XT32 as it is, not messing with it too much, and then measuring what comes out of that subwoofer, and if you notice a couple of particular peaks, going ahead and using the parametric EQ to tame down those, and stop. don't worry too much. You don't have to think that you're going to get some unrealistic result. You're just chasing your tail at that point.
Continuing the question, after dialing in his subwoofers as much as his current system allows, does he just run Odyssey and leave it at that? He's noticed that in a lot of the RU and Mini DSP tutorials, they seem to set their subwoofer output to LFE plus mains and play the test sweeps from their front speakers and subwoofer together, at least during measurement. But then they go back and set an 80 Hz crossover afterwards. Is that really the right thing to do?
I mean, my opinion is no. I assume what they're attempting to do is make sure that the crossover from their main speakers into the subwoofer, because let's say you measure just the subwoofer, all right? So it does whatever it does up to 160, 200 hertz, and you've measured that response. And then you measure just the response of your front speaker that's been set to small, and it does whatever it does down to, 80 hertz and a little bit below that, because there's going to be the crossover slope. And then you don't necessarily want to just hope and pray that when you play them together, that crossover is nice and smooth and didn't result in some unexpected hump or dip in that crossover region. So you want to play the full range through, say, your front left speaker channel, but with the subwoofer incorporated so that you can see on the graph what's happening in that crossover region. And maybe you end up needing to adjust the phase or play with the distance setting of the speaker or the subwoofer until you get the proper blend between those two sound sources in that crossover region, as opposed to just hoping that the individual measurements are going to sum together the way that we want them to. But changing the actual configuration in terms of how the bass is managed, that isn't something I would recommend, right? There's no reason that you can't send a full range signal sweep to just the front left channel or just the front right channel out of Room EQ Wizard, but simply have your AV receiver set to stereo listening mode, which means that the subwoofer will be active and the crossover, which is the thing we're actually trying to test, is also active. We don't want to send a full range signal to the speakers, so we don't want to set them to large because then we're not getting the way it's actually going to be used in reality, and we don't want to set the subwoofer output to LFE plus mains because it isn't necessary to have the entire signal from the front speakers also being sent to the subwoofer and then relying on the crossover built into the subwoofer. We don't need to do that. That's all handled as long as you aren't using the direct listening mode. So I suspect maybe this is the crowd that's like, I only ever want to use the direct listening mode. So to get that crossover test working, I have to set it to LFE plus main. Otherwise, the subwoofer doesn't play when I play a full range signal out of only the front left or only the front right speaker. So that could be the reason behind it. But as long as you set your AV receiver to a listening mode that activates the subwoofer, there's no reason to do that, because in reality, that isn't how you're going to use your system unless you insist on using direct mode, which isn't what Tom and I would recommend.
Next question from Michael. He's heard it said when it comes to buying external amplifiers for your home theater, it's good to think of it as a, quote, buy once, cry once purchase. He's got plans for a large 6,000 plus cubic foot dedicated theater in the future. So do I. Awesome. But not anytime soon. Nevertheless, he likes planning ahead and understanding what criteria an amplifier would need to meet for the future room. When deciding on an amplifier that's meant to last many, many years, what should he be looking for? What will be worth the investment, and could we share what we use in our own theaters? Before I'm buying any piece of gear for a long, long time, I'd like to find one that a manufacturer is going to be around to support it, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I'm buying something for a 6,000 plus cubic foot theater that may or may not happen at some point in the future. You're also, if you can afford to build that room, your chances are your financial situation may be different than it is today. I think there are some excellent amplifiers out there, more so than ever before, with both the internet direct as well as a lot of the, consumer brands that you can pick up. Monoblock, 2-channel, 3, 4, 5, 7, 12, 16-channel amplifiers out there. So, I think you're better off buying an amplifier that's right for your needs right now, and then sell it with the house and buy new cool stuff later on.
I cannot disagree. I know Tom would agree because he's written whole articles on AV Gadgets about how, we all love this idea of future-proof. I'm buying for the future. I'm buying a thing that I'm never going to have to replace. And it's like, through experience, I will absolutely vouch for this, and it sounds like Joe can too, right? Whenever you try to buy today something that is going to be right for the theater that doesn't even exist yet, it's like, you know what? I would have been better off getting what is right for me right now. That tends to be the thing. Now, I think we'll all agree, amplifiers are the type of thing that, unless you get into a drastically different scenario, they can last you a very long time. Like if you get a well-built amplifier, there isn't going to be a need to replace it unless you get into a significantly different situation. So like my easy answer is, look, if you get one of the amplifiers that's built by ATI, so one of the monolith amplifiers, AVRant is now selling the ones that are OEM'd by ATI or directly from ATI themselves. You get one of their 200 watts times 7 amplifiers or something like that. There's going to be relatively few scenarios where that is incapable of doing what you need to do. And if you've gotten to the situation where it doesn't have enough wattage, it's time to get more efficient speakers than it is to, go to the 2,000 watt amplifier or whatever that your speakers probably can't even handle having that much power put into them to hit whatever output that the 200 watt ATI is just not able to get, reasonable speakers to. You can go get some JTRs and you're going to be able to blast your ears off pretty much no matter what size room you have. So something like that to me is a very safe purchase. It's probably overkill for the room that you have right now, but the likelihood that you're going to have any sort of issues with one of those ATI amplifiers is pretty darn small. And that's a company that's been around for years and years. I have no reason to believe that they're going away anytime soon. I can tell you from personal experience, because to answer the last part of your question, I have an ATI amplifier. I have one of their 7-channel amplifiers, and the other channels in my system, I power from my Denon receiver. So I'm doing what I recommend to other people to do, and I absolutely do not need the ATI amplifier in my tiny den in my apartment, but I like having it, and that amplifier, no reason to expect that it isn't gonna be buried with me if I want it to, because that thing is built like a tank, and I can tell you from experience, they absolutely stand behind their amplifiers.
So two questions I'll throw out there. One is first actually a statement. I've had 9 monoblock amplifiers in a house I don't own anymore that all stayed with that home theater when I sold that house, right? So now I've got 2 7-channel amplifiers that I'm using from Rants. But what are your thoughts on, one, amplifier technology keeps going, right? Class A, Class AB, Class D, Class G. What are we going to be at, in a couple of years from now? I agree that a good Class AB amplifier will last forever. Capacitors dry out, but for the most part, those can be replaced. You can recap an amplifier that's 20 years old for the most part.
And from a company like ATI, like you can contact them and
the parts
they will
are
do
there.
that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But so it's kind of hard to justify buying, a dragster engine for the Honda you're driving today, right?
Right.
It's maybe more overkill. I think you're better off buying what works for right now.
I completely agree. I mean, I think everything that's going on with the switch mode power supplies, so like when we're talking Class G or Class H, that is like a Class AB amplifier as far as the output stage of it goes, but it's the power supply on the other end that changes it from a traditional Class AB with a linear amplifier to something like a Class G or a Class H. So I mean, that's like what Emotiva is doing, right? They're attaching switch mode power supplies to Class AB amplifier modules and creating a Class H amplifier, or that's what Adcom or Arcam rather is doing in their flagship. They're attaching a switch mode power supply and creating a Class G amplifier in that case. So I think that probably just in terms of like material cost, how much it costs to make that power supply, I think probably makes too much sense to not be sort of the future of it. Like what we're seeing with all the really good load invariant Class D amplifiers is they cost just as much or more than the Class AB amplifiers at this point, and there isn't much reason to expect that they're going to get wildly less expensive. Where they're saving you some money is they're not as physically heavy and they use less electricity because they're more efficient. So there is some savings to be had with the Class Ds. I mean, looking at those new Class D amplifiers that NAD is using, I mean, it's almost perfect. I mean, obviously nothing is perfect and 100% efficient, but it's essentially as good as you can rightly expect any amplifier to be. So, I mean, that's an option. If you want to go, 2 channels at a time, you get one of those NAD, their brand newest Class D amplifiers with, so I mean, in terms of, he's like, what are we looking for? We're looking for low noise floor, right? So you want to look at what is the signal to noise ratio, particularly at the 1 watt spec, not at the full power driven, where you're very unlikely to ever be able to actually hear the noise floor if you're driving this amplifier literally as high as it can go in its output wattage. It's at the 1 watt spec, which the better amplifier manufacturers list that. And I mean, if it's anything over 90 decibels, the audibility of that, like, you're just not going to hear the noise floor on that amplifier. Technically, what is it, 96 point whatever it is, would be like perfection, right? It would mean that there is no noise versus the signal that's coming in when you're delivering the voltage for a 1 watt out of there. So if you're seeing something like a signal to noise ratio at the 1 watt spec that's 90 decibels or higher, like, that's an amplifier that's just going to be quiet. Connect whatever speakers you want to it. You're not going to hear a noise floor out of there. You're looking for something that has a reasonable amount of wattage. If you're talking about a 6,000 cubic foot room, you're going to have a pretty decent listening distance. You're not going to want to get 50 watts per channel. You're probably going to exceed that. But, again, you get to 200 watts per channel sustained, all channels driven, like what Emotiva or ATI is delivering, or those NAD Class D amplifiers, or Anthem would be another brand that you could look at, that's delivering that kind of power. You can get the speakers that will get you to whatever output level you need, regardless of the room or listening distance. So it's a pretty safe bet that if you're getting upwards of 200 watts per channel, that you're unlikely to need to upgrade that unless you make a choice of speakers that isn't appropriate for your room size and listening distance. So, I mean, those are sort of the main things, because when we're talking about external amplifiers, what are we getting them for? We're getting them for the extremes. We're getting them for the low noise floor that an AV receiver might not deliver, and we're getting it for the headroom that an AV receiver might not deliver. And if you had speakers and a listening distance appropriate that you could work within the capabilities of the AV receiver, you're not audibly getting much difference. You're getting it for the toe room and the headroom, that external amplifier. So that's what we're looking for: the low noise floor, the higher headroom, the all channels driven in case you run into that scenario, and then a company that's going to stand behind it. So mentioned a bunch of brands that I would trust, and if you got one of those, it'd be like, yeah, the likelihood you're ever going to need to replace that amplifier seems pretty low in my opinion.
But I would say, what if, right now maybe he's buying a 7-channel amplifier and he's going to do a 14, 16, 18 channel system down the road. Right. Does he have to go then try and buy that same matching amplifier again? Does he buy a current amplifier at that time? It just gets tricky to try and plan
that's where you're gonna match it to the system you absolutely have. So yes, 100%, I agree with the initial advice, which is don't worry about it too much. If you're in a scenario where you genuinely don't even need an external amplifier right now, and you're just like, well, I kind of want one, but if I'm gonna buy one, I want to get one that's gonna work for this future room that doesn't exist yet, I would say just save the money. Like, there's not really much need. And if you could genuinely use an amplifier right now, and you get the one that's appropriate for your room now, and you get a good one, right? You get a Monolith, or you get an Emotiva, or you get an Outlaw, or you get an Anthem, like, you are going to be able to recoup on that, or you're going to be able to repurpose it in either another room, or you're going to use it to drive your overhead speakers or something like that. Like, you're going to be able to recoup the money on one that, okay, maybe it's not appropriate to drive the front speakers in your 6,000 cubic foot room, but exactly like Joe said, you're probably in a different financial situation at that point, and you're probably going to need to buy more amplifiers anyway. So at that point, you get the ones that are appropriate. I think that's the reasonable advice. So we've gone over the 2 hours already. I had wanted to talk about some of this stuff. I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to, like, I think you mentioned one or two things you wanted to touch upon, because I just jotted down some ideas that I was interested on the Pro installer side. So I don't want to go to some ridiculous 2.5-3 hour length on this thing. But if there was something that you wanted to mention out of what I wrote down, I'm happy to chat about it with you. Yeah.
So just a little bit. So I think you had a question about projectors and what are some of the esoteric higher end brand projectors, the Barcos, the Christies offer in high end installations that your more consumer Sony and JVCs cannot, right? So the things like Barco and Christie, they stem out of the commercial world of cinemas that you're going to that have dedicated cooling systems and need a huge amount of light. So the three things that you're going to find going with something like that, off the top of my head, horsepower, right? Just how much light can they put out? So talking to the guys at JVC, they say their projectors can easily do up to about 165 inch screen, right? Okay. And that's with, either fresh bulb or a new laser or whatever it is that's in there. what happens when you go to that beyond that, right? If you go to the 180, 200 inch, type size screen, you need to look at something that can put out the kind of lumens to get a decent amount of foot lamberts on that screen. And the Barcos and the Christies are very capable of doing those kind of things.
Okay.
They might have multiple lamps, higher lasers, etc. The other thing,
it's not so much that they have some massive advantage on the contrast side, or even on the black level side, or that they support higher frame rates or something like that. Because honestly, on those facets, I think the JVCs are right up there in terms of supporting those features. And when it comes to just on-screen contrast, black level, I'm not seeing Barcos and Christies that are blowing the JVCs out of the water on that front, but in sheer horsepower, sheer lumens coming out of there.
Right. So that's one part of it. The other, a lot of times, is throw distance, right? Okay. And it's lens. You can't swap out a lens in a JVC. Right. A lot of the Barcos or the Christies, you might have 7-8 different lens options depending on how deep that room is. And when you're building a room with a 200-inch screen that has seating for 20-plus people in there, multiple rows, you might have a 30-foot throw distance that the Sony and the JVC could never really do, and you might want that in a dedicated projector booth. So, again, those bigger, more commercial focused, and these things are monsters. If you look at them, they're big.
You probably want them behind a wall because they're not necessarily quiet either,
and they're loud and they're hot.
Right.
And then the third thing is, and you'll see this in some of the Barcos, is the aspect ratio of the chip itself. They will actually do some 235 chips in the projectors. And if you're doing a 235 screen, it's much easier to get a true aspect ratio, or they're going to go even bigger, right, beyond 4K in the chips that they use in those, whether DLP or whatever kind of chip it is. But so those are kind of some of the reasons that you're going to use those brands. They're also going to offer, if you're a dealer of theirs, very strong support, right? They're going to give you a lot more technical. You can call them up and talk through issues with them. A lot of times they're there, 24/7 type support for certain high dollar clients. So there are reasons to consider those for the right application.
I think it's sort of following similar to what we were just talking about, right? It's it's getting the correct solution, the correct equipment for the situation that exists, right? Not necessarily thinking ahead. Oh, I might have this room in the future. Let's buy ahead. It's no, you're designing a theater with certain parameters, larger screen sizes, more seats, farther seating distances.
And I'll throw out there, Sony does offer some projectors in the GTZ 380. That's an $80,000, 10,000 lumen projector. That does have
the
variable
lenses cost $8,000 on top of that.
But you can buy different lenses for it depending on the throw distance. Right, so there are, but that's you're pulling from the commercial side when you're buying a projector like that, and you're putting it in a very large home application, right? A projector like that would be massive overkill on my 130-inch screen.
Well, that was just it, because sometimes sort of where I was thinking in jotting that question down was somebody's got 120-inch screen. They're not increasing their screen size. They're not increasing their throw distance or their viewing distance. And they're like, I've got a Sony or I've got a JVC, but oh boy, if I could just put a Barco in here, it would be so much better. And I'm like, would it?
But that's like saying, in my theater, I want to run, 8 15-inch subwoofers. But I'm only going to use, modest size, mid-range, LCRs. You're just going to have so much headroom, so much overkill that you're never going to tap any of that, right? The rest of your system isn't going to keep up with it. It's an imbalance, right? It's like putting too big of an engine in a car that you don't have the traction, right? Carol Shelby said...
It isn't always that just getting the bigger, more expensive, yes, more capable in terms of lumens, like that, it's just always better. It's no, it's got to match the parameters. I think that makes sense.
There also are some things from a usability on software. There are a lot more capabilities as far as calibration, adapting to issues, edge blending and different things that the software built into these is much more calibrator friendly for people in the professional side of the industry.
Okay. So, I don't want it to run too long, but when it comes to the much more affordable projectors, so we often recommend Epsons around here because I think they are a very nice price to performance ratio that you're getting out of there, something like the Epson 5050 UB, or if we want to get less expensive than that, but still something I think is pretty high value, like I frequently recommend quite a few of the BenQ models and that. So, I mean, do you ever find those going into professional installations and being like, this is the right solution?
Absolutely. I've used the Epsons in some of the assisted living jobs that we use, because the Epson, good quality projector, good image, reliable, very cost effective for the needs. You look at something like the Epson laser projectors, the 12,000 that's out there. Great projector, can give you a pretty good size image. I haven't done much with the BenQ stuff myself, but definitely the Epsons, the Sonys, the JVCs, more of that side of things.
Cool. So, yeah, I mean, I think I remember when we talked yesterday, you had a comment about screens, and I think we'll leave it there. You know, I mean, at some point, I'm pretty darn sure we're going to have you back.
Okay.
So we can dig into some other things there if time allows. But yeah, I know you had one comment you wanted to make about projection screens, and that follows right along what we were just talking.
Sure. And what we were talking about kind of, and I'm sitting across from a Stewart screen right now that's a Studio Tech 130 MicroPerf 235 130-inch diagonal, and I love this screen, right? It's a fantastic screen. But the question I think you were asking is, what more expensive screens offer over, say, a silver ticket and a pitch black theater, or a plain white screen makes sense? There are technologies built into the screens from manufacturers like Stewart that build that screen from the ground up, right? They are putting coatings on there. They're asking you where the projector is going to be mounted. They're taking into account the reflective angle, things like that. In that screen, it's labeled, where's the top, where's the bottom. And when you're building it from scratch for that purpose, they're asking you all those questions when you're putting the bid in together for them. I see the silver ticket as a very affordable and entry-level and practical, especially if you're using an Epson or a BenQ type projector. You're, like we talked about with the amplifiers, you're trying to match the system all together, right? Chain's only as good as its weakest link. Home theaters are a balance of compromises. So if you're not spending $1 million on the projector, do you need to spend $1 million on the screen? Will you see a big difference? Hard to say there. I'm using a JVC NX5 projector with this screen, and I've been very, very happy with the results. I've put an X7 in this room, taken a look at that. I've had a Panasonic in this room before. I've used the Sony's InFocus, a number of different projectors in my own home theaters. The other thing, and I think we've talked about this before via email, the fit and finish on the more expensive projectors is worlds better. That silver ticket, I put 5 or 6 of those together, and it's a little kludgy. Bring along your rubber mallet potentially, and even once it's together, the corners they don't line up as perfectly as something like the Stewart does. It's for the price a good way to go, but it's not quite the same as
it's not the top of the line. It's not the top of the line. Yeah, I think like the thing Tom and I will often bump up against is like, okay, if I'm saying I want the Stewart screen, but if I get that, my budget being what it is means
you got to find a balance.
I'm gonna have to stop at the Epson 5050. Great projector, fantastic screen, but if I went down to the silver ticket screen, I could get a Sony 5000 or something like that, right? I could increase my projector, right?
But my argument there, and I talked with DJ about this, is, and kind of back to what we talked about with the amplifiers, buy once, cry once, right? Yeah. Screens are somewhere that, I mentioned all those projectors that I've had in here, they've all were shining on that same Stewart screen, right? So as my budget has gone up and I've been able to buy better and better projectors, the screen is somewhere that I haven't had to change out. Its technology really hasn't changed much. I think Studio Tech's on version 4 of the formulation of their screen, and they have gotten incrementally better. But this one I've still been very happy with. So it's, if you can afford the best, buy it. But let's put it this way, I would take a silver ticket screen over no screen. I would take a Stewart screen over a silver ticket. It's a ladder of improvements. That's kind of my take on it. But the support, the profitability for the resellers on this, the questions and answer, I can call up, a couple of the guys at Stewart tomorrow morning and get my questions answered really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
They also support their screens forever, right? I can take a Stewart screen that was made 10, 15 years ago, say, here's the serial number on it. They can pull up the drawings on it. They can tell me what screen it was. They can tell me who ordered it back then. And if I say, I want to keep this frame and put a new material into it, no problem. We know exactly how it was manufactured. We'll ship it out a new one in no time. And there's zero support when it comes to Silver Ticket. You're better off watching YouTube videos on how to put it together.
Well, and I mean, in a way, it's less expensive to just buy a whole new one than to try and make any alteration, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And disposable.
And Silver Ticket doesn't make a motorized 4-way masking screen, right?
No, of course.
There's things that these upper end manufacturers do that are amazing with their product.
Okie doke. Well, for the sake of time, we are going to stop there. But yes, I had other questions we could talk about, and it's been an absolute pleasure, Joe. I hope you've had fun and enjoyed our conversation as well.
Very much so. Anytime I get to talk about home theater stuff, absolutely would love to come back on the show sometime with you.
Fantastic. Well, then, I will wrap things up here by once again reminding you that we do answer home theater and AV questions. Hope you had fun listening to today's answers with our guest, Joe, here. So if you want your question answered, just send it on into us. That is question@avrant.com, our email address to send those. So I do have a bunch of names that are on the list here, and I did some editorializing. These are folks I actually gave email replies to, so it's not as though we're making them wait forever and ever to get any sort of reply from somebody. But we do want to answer all questions on the podcast when we can, and I know I'm going to have another guest co-host with me next week, so I did want to mention that Nathan, Jack, Shawn, and Nick, your questions have been received, and they are on the list, and I know you know because I email replied back to you, but for anyone else wondering, those should be first up next week, unless we do some more changing of plans while Tom is away and I have some fun with the format of this podcast. But before we leave here, I just wanted to thank our listeners of the week one more time. Kevin, thank you so much for your PayPal donation. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place you can go if you want to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 138 patrons over there. And then we want to thank the folks who sent in notes of gratitude just for keeping this podcast going. And those came in this week from Gurinder, Jay, Kris, Julian, Jack, Shawn, Toke, and Rohan. So thank you all very much for your notes of encouragement, and they are very much appreciated. So I will say, on behalf of Tom Andry and for AV Rant, I'm Rob H.
And I'm Joe K. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.